reports from unfinished business listing the use of 504 4th Street East as the organization that I am employed by is part of the proposal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further disclosures of interest? Okay, seeing none. Have a motion to go in committee of the whole, please. Councillor McIntosh, Councillor Good, all in favor? Carried. Thank you. Motion to adopt the minutes of the meeting from Tuesday, May 23rd. Councillor Sabouret, seconder. Councillor Bennett, any discussion on the minutes? All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Presentations.
Our first presentations this evening is the St. Lawrence River Institute of Environmental Sciences, giving us an update, their annual update. And joining Dr. Jeff Riddell is Emily Durashi and Lexi Harkale.
Good evening, and welcome to City Council, or I should say welcome back to City Council.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is this on? Or
You may need to push down on the stem of the microphone.
that
Okay,
it?
now it's on, yeah.
It's red now, so I'm good. Thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to be here. And how do we forward the slides? So you're going to forward the slides. Thanks, Menno. So we'll go to the next slide. So I'm Jeff Riedel. I'm the Executive Director of the River Institute. It's been my great pleasure over the years to do this annual presentation to City, and I see there's some new faces around the table, so good to be able to see you all. And joining me in some fresh faces for us is Lexi Harkewell and Emily DeRoshi, and they'll present some of the aspects of the Institute, some of the stories that we have to tell. So next slide. So just again, since there are some new councillors, they might not know about the River Institute too much in terms of the history and the relationship with the City of Cornwall. The River Institute was incorporated as a unique community partnership with the founding partners, including the City of Cornwall, the counties of SDNG, and the Mohawks of Akwesasne, and many interested residents of the area that were interested in the health of the river. And the goal was to create a globally recognized science organization that would inspire and guide communities towards a healthy and sustainable river ecosystem and environment. So you can see maybe some younger faces from those times. And the city was very involved, especially with some financial contributions in the initial years of starting up the Institute and in the creation of the River Institute Research Center. So next slide, please. We are governed by a volunteer board of directors, and we just had our AGM. And we have a new group of directors, and you can see their list of names there. Many I'm sure you recognize. We're fortunate to have Deborah Daigle, who's returning as chair, and also we're welcoming Councillor Hollingsworth to the table as the city's representative. And we thank Councillor Bennett for his many years of contribution, and it was so nice to have again the city represented on our board. Next slide, please. So our three pillars of work that we do, or what our activities are: research, outreach, and education. And joining me just recently this past year on the leadership team, as well as Christina Collard and Brian Hickey, who are names that perhaps you're familiar with, who've been with the Institute for some time. But we're very fortunate to welcome Dr. Lee McGahee and Matt Windle on sort of that leadership team with the Institute, leading our research and education and outreach programs. As you can see here, we've been really keeping tallies of what we've been doing over the past number of years. And in this past year, we actually accomplished over 30 research projects and 16 community events, and reached over 5,600 youth in our community. So I think it was a busy year. Next slide, please. And this is all really the work of our team. So you can see this incredible group of people that we have, and we're very fortunate to have working with the Institute. And we actually have 27 staff this year, including 7 PhDs. So despite COVID, we've grown. Next slide. In fact, in terms of revenues, we actually surpassed for our first time the $2 million mark. So that's a pretty impressive number, and I can recall the days when our budget was something less than 150,000. So that's a slow and steady growth of the Institute. And unlike, like many, I guess, nonprofit organizations and charitable organizations, we don't get any base government funding. We don't get any base funding. Our funding comes through competitive proposals, requests to foundations, governments, programs, and through donations and some of the services we provide. So it is a lot of work to get that kind of money together. So we're very proud of the being able to kind of develop that funding base and, of course, contributing to the economy of the area. Next slide, please. And in fact, as part of kind of that work, we've have received some recent recognition in late in 2022 in December. We were finalists for the National Nature Inspiration Award through Museum of Nature and through our River Report program led by Dr. Lee Magahi. She's shown there in the upper slide. And then just last month, the Association for Great Lakes Research awarded the River Institute the Jack Valentine Award. So that's for our contribution to science and informing the public and informing public policy. So that was a real feather in our cap. So we're really proud of that. So just some highlights of some of our research of the past year. Next slide. One of our biggest programs, so I would say flagship field program, is our Fish Identification Nearshore Survey. It's really a program that's mapping and monitoring the biodiversity in the St. Lawrence River, and it was inspired actually through our partnership with Akwesasne, where elders in the community were saying, what's happening to the little fish? Everyone talks about the sports fish, and we know that our government program is monitoring those large sports fish. What about the little fish, especially with the zebra mussels and the round gobies and all of those sorts of creatures that are invading the river? So we started this program, and now, somewhat like 5 years later, we have over 200,000 data records taken over this whole St. Lawrence River from Kingston to Montreal. And we're mapping out those impacts to those species. You know, we know the climate's changing, we know the river's changing, water levels are fluctuating, and we know that there's invasive species that are in the river. So this is a really important database that we're kind of really well known for. And the governments who actually don't have a program looking at these small species are, you know, they are really feel very fortunate to have access to that data. Next slide. We also are very proud of our ability to respond to community concerns where we can, and one of which is actually a new program that's, we were getting calls late fall last year about increasing number of eel fatalities in the river below the dam. And so we started, and we went out and we were investigating. We called our partners from Akwesasne, of course, who have a real vested interest in that. We started doing some investigations to figure out what's going on. And not only are we interested in the fatalities, but we're also interested in those eels that are still viable but have suffered trauma. And we were very fortunate to get funding to investigate that in more detail to understand the effects of trauma on eels and other fish that traverse the dam, as well as to see whether or not there's some habitat that can be created that would actually kind of like almost like a recovery area in the river. So this is a project that Dr. Courtney Holden, one of our newer scientists, is starting out and just starting this year. So this really interesting research. You might see a familiar face here is Georgia Bach. She's presented to council, I think it was last summer. She is our remedial action plan coordinator. She also sits on the Cornwall Environmental Committee, and she is helping with this remedial action program, which is the long-term cleanup of the river, and it is making progress, and we're happy about that. Next slide. Some of the work as well, as mentioned, the climate change and the impacts of a changing climate on the river. And so we do have some programs looking at nearshore temperature. All of the temperature sensors in the river are in the main channel. What's happening in those nearshore areas that's where the fish live, that's where people, you find a lot of activity. So she's out there measuring those temperature changes, as well as a crew like Matt Windle and his team are out there looking at the impacts of water level variations on wetlands, which are really important parts of the ecosystem. Next slide. So all of this is really creating an important platform for research, bringing researchers to Cornwall and Akwesasne, I would say. We work really closely, as you can hear, with Akwesasne and the environmental program there. And you can just see the number of universities and nonprofit organizations and public agencies that are working with the River Institute through the programs, and including, we have a project this year with the City of Cornwall that's related to this Cornwall waterfront. So we're really happy about that program as well. So the next slide, I think, is where I get to introduce Emily, and she can take over the mic and tell us a little bit more about something called the River Strategy. Emily.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Emily Derushi, and I'm the River Strategy Coordinator and an educator with the Institute. And next slide, please. So as a part of my role, I'm involved with a lot of outreach activities. So we've started to celebrate not just science, but all ways of knowing on the river. Next slide, please. And one of these projects that brings all ways of knowing to the forefront is a really cool, unique project called the Great River Report. If you haven't heard of it before, it's an ecosystem health report that's focused on the health of the Upper St. Lawrence, and it's being done in partnership with the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne. It's being framed through the Haudenosaunee Thanksgiving Address, so it's being done through a very holistic approach. So it includes Indigenous knowledge and art, the science and technical reports, but it includes ways of communicating the science in a way that the public will understand with infographics, visuals, as well as community stories and knowledge. Next slide, please. One of the newer aspects of the Great River Report is education materials to also engage youth. So this is growing on the pre-existing education programs at the Institute. And so I have the great pleasure of leading this part. So this is the Changemaker series, and it's designed to inspire youth to make change in their communities. So they begin by first reading a story about a changemaker and then stepping into the shoes of the changemaker through a learning activity. I actually have some copies here with me today, so if you know any teachers, I can gladly provide you with some copies to bring to some classrooms. Next slide, please. So as I said, I'm the River Strategy Coordinator. So we are trying to create a hub for communication and collaboration on the Upper St. Lawrence. So this is being done in partnership with the Mohawk Council, and we've so far engaged 50 organizations on the river, and we're growing that network every day if we can. And so we are just trying to finalize our draft framework as well our steering committee. So we actually have some framework documents here as well. So if you're interested in taking a look, please let me know. I'll gladly give you a copy. And then if you want to connect, provide some insight, or even join the strategy, we'd love to have you. And I can provide more information as well in future meetings if you'd like. Next slide. As a part of our outreach, we also host an annual river symposium. And this year is actually our 30th anniversary. So it's going to be themed A River Through Time. It's taking place on October 25th, 26th, and 27th at the Civic Complex. Actually, the third day is actually fully online, and it is free to attend. And as a part of our 30th anniversary, we're actually having other events as well. So we're having a screening in the Lamoureux Park, as well as a fundraising dinner. So we hope you'll join us. It's free to attend, and you can watch our social media channels for more info. I believe I pass it to Lexi.
Just sneak over here. Hi, everyone. I'm Lexi Harkwell. I've been a part of the education team at the River Institute for the last 4 years, but actually in the last couple of weeks have transitioned into more of a communications role. So that's one of the things that I'm doing now. You can take the next slide, please. But I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some education highlights and kind of what we do in our education department. So one of the biggest things that we really strive to include in all of our education programming, whether that's engaging the youth through community events like our family workshops that we host at the OPG Visitor Center throughout the summer, or our summer camps, or our school workshops where students come and visit us at the River Institute, or we go into classrooms and visit them, is really making sure that we're connecting students and youth with real science and real research. So we're always using our actual research projects as the foundation for the education that we're doing with students, and often they're actually collecting data that is used in many of our research projects. So that's one thing that we're really proud of with our education, and we have a big project actually that we're working on right now as part of a program called Gen Action to educate children about climate change in Canada and what those impacts look like even on a regional scale. So we're developing a really great augmented reality experience through a map that children can interact with the St. Lawrence River and will be able to experience some of our research that maybe otherwise they wouldn't be able to get to see, which is really cool. You can go to the next slide. We also have a really great partnership with St. Lawrence College. Many of our staff actually teach in the environmental technician program at the college, and all of the photos you see are actually graduates of that program who have come on to work at the River Institute. So we're really happy to have that partnership. Some upcoming programming that we have going on are summer camps. are back in full swing this year. This is the first year we're going to have our Eco Friends camp since the pandemic started, and that's our camps for ages 6 to 11, and then we have another camp for ages 12 to 15 where kids get to come out and actually help us with our summer research projects. And as I mentioned, we have our family workshops at the OPG Visitor Center, and those are free for families to attend, usually on a Saturday each month in the summer. And actually next week we have our first fundraiser, our first big event, also since the pandemic. It's called Making Waves. It's kind of a backyard social. There'll be some live music and drinks and snacks. I believe many of the counselors have already received an invitation, but if you'd like to purchase tickets, you can do so through Eventbrite or on our website, or come to the River Institute. We have some tickets also available for purchase in person. And so our last slide is just questions, and so we just want to thank you all for taking the time to listen to us all today and having us here, and we're really happy to be able to share about all the things that we do at the River Institute with you all.
Great, thank you. Before we go to questions, can I get a motion to receive the presentation from council? Councillor Sabra and Councillor Goodjoe. Questions from council? Comments? Yeah, Councillor McDonald and Councillor Good.
This is probably a pretty silly question, but the image that flashes when you talk about the eel recovery, are we looking at, looks like seaweed waves or whatever? What is the image of?
It's a spot in the river that actually there's a bit of an, you can see a shoal up, an island, and actually in there, the white carcasses they're actually eels that are showing in there. So they're eels that are either injured or dead, and that's collecting in that spot. So that's obviously was the kind of thing that, and it's a drone flight, so we have a drone photograph we're showing. And it's the sort of thing that the community members, the anglers who are out there at that time of year, this is November, October, November, and saying, hey, have you seen this? And so we went out there and we started documenting them. We actually presented, we did a lot of research documenting the numbers, and presented that work actually at the recent Great Lakes Conference, just to sort of the methodology, using drones and using different, see, there are species at risk, so you have to be very careful in terms of how you can't just pick them up and start handling them. So you had to use like observations from a distance.
So I recall going to, just to follow up if I may, I went to a presentation at OPG probably 5 or 6 years ago, and there was discussion then about an eel ladder having been instituted at the dam. So is that?
Yeah, I mean, the eels.
Panacea?
Thank you, Councilor McDonald. So through you, Mr. Mayor, so the eel story is an incredible one. I think most of us who maybe grew up on the St. Lawrence River, I mean, the last thing you wanted on your fish hook was another eel, right?
Yeah.
And because they were so prevalent, and it was like, you know, and I do remember some choice words that my uncle used to say when that would happen. But, you know, what's happened is the eel population has crashed precipitously down to just small percentage of what they were. So there is definitely a lot of interest through the, through the Ministry of Natural Resources to help the eels recover. There is a recovery plan. There are species at risk in Ontario. And one of the things to help them recover is the migrating eels, when they're in their younger stages, they migrate up the St. Lawrence River and up to Lake Ontario, and they go through the dam. So those are the early stages. But when they're mature and large enough that you can see in the photo, they're now returned to the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, the Sargasso Sea, and they're going to spawn. So that's what they're doing on their way down. So the eels going up are small. They're young eels, and the ones coming down are the larger, mature eels. So they do the opposite to salmon. Yeah.
The latter is used only by the eels migrating upstream. The ones
Yeah.
migrating downstream have to go through the turbines in order to.
Okay, those are the big ones going down.
Yeah, the big ones going down have to
They're
have
on their
no
own.
other, but there's a great deal amount of research going on to try to figure out what would be a way to sort of gather the eels or herd them or corral them in some way so that they can be protected.
Mm-hmm.
There are other programs that are in place that they actually truck those eels around the
Heard
dams.
that, yeah.
So there's a lot of effort being done, but at the same time, this is happening, and it's an interesting story. And I think because we're located where we are, and we have a lot of interested. Actually, Dr. Courtney Holden, she actually did her PhD on eels,
Okay.
so she has a very specific interest there.
And then what year was that photo taken, Jeff?
That was November 2022, last year.
Counselor Good.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to thank you for this presentation. It's one, aesthetically beautiful, but very informative. And I love the community and collaborative approach that's been taken using some of the traditional Indigenous knowledge and then putting things in a context that they're digestible for everyday people, because not very many people read through, peer-reviewed scientific articles very often and get a actually good understanding of what's going on. I've participated in a number of your Science on Tap events as well, and so it's so awesome to see this work being done and engaging the community. I also just wanted to highlight that I've watched some of your Instagram stories as well with my 2-year-old, and he has been absolutely fascinated. We've just sat there going through them. So, sometimes there's little things that don't make it up on there to council, but you hit people in different demographics, and it's such a great thing to see people engaged in this. I'm very, very impressed that you've made it to a $2 million budget. That is absolutely wonderful. So I don't really have any questions. I just wanted to commend you for the hard work that you're doing and thank you and say, keep it up.
Thank you very much, Councillor Good. And I think that concept of communication is what these two people really specialize in. So maybe just a couple of words about social media and the role.
Yeah, that's kind of our wheelhouse. So I coordinated the stories and stuff like that, and we try to use social media to engage youth as much as possible. And there are adults also on social media, and we use Instagram more for like high school students, middle school, Facebook to reach kind of all audiences, and then we also have Twitter and LinkedIn to connect with other scientists as well.
Yeah, so this presentation and many of the other visuals that you often see coming out of the River Institute come from Stephanie Hildebrand, who works for the River Report team and also is a professional photographer. So full credits to her for all of her beautiful photos that she's always contributing to our work. But I think there are quite a few of us at the River Institute who are really excited to see kind of our communications side of thing push the boundaries. So we really appreciate your comments.
You're doing an incredible job with that.
Thank you.
Counselor Ngudjo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I just wanted to mention that you have become a source of great pride for our community. You have done things well, so I wanted to thank you for what you're doing, and I hope you're going to continue doing what you're doing because it's very powerful, your contribution to our community. So. And I hope you're going to continue in success as you're doing. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Your Worship. Seems to me just yesterday, Jeff, 30 years ago, that we volunteered the funding. It kind of blows me away how quickly time flies. It's kind of nice to see your institution is not just maintained but thrived and in fact has grown. Kind of a question from somebody who doesn't really know what they're talking about, so bear with me on this one. I have a picture of our family cottage, 1950s, bulrushes all the way along the shoreline, thick as thieves. And I also noticed that the water, those bulrushes are gone now. The water seems infinitely clearer than it was even not that long ago. We're talking about eels. I remember my kids using flashlights along the shoreline at night, and there'd be eels all over the place, and they're long gone. Just last year, out boating around, the water, it seemed to me, was about 78 degrees, 24, 25 for you metric people out there. My point is our ecosystem suffering or potentially under some risk in light of the fact that there are visible changes for us non-science people? Is that valid? Should we kind of have a little alarm bell, a little flag up, or are we, don't worry, everything's fine, because we talk about these things all the time?
So I'm tempted to answer your question, but I see someone who's just anxious to get.
Looks like they need to say
yeah,
something.
so
I'm good with that.
I'm going to let Emily speak about this because, in a way, that's the number one question that we get, right?
It's
Can
what
I
we
swim in the
worry
river?
about
Can I
as
eat
lay
the fish?
people.
Can I drink the water? And that was what inspired something that you're going to talk about.
Yes. So we have a few answers to questions now through a project called the Great River Report that I highlighted. So I'm going to
Okay.
give you a card to check out our website.
Okay.
We have an indicator for the yellow perch release that might have some answers to your questions. There's been some changes in nutrients in the water that have contributed to less plant matter being in the river, as well as changes in the perch and many other changes as well. Just to give a quick snapshot. So I'll give you a card, and I encourage you to check out our website and see our visuals. And I think Jeff will add some details.
Yeah, and I'm going to give you the Coles notes. Just
Sure.
So because this is a really interesting. We just actually wrote a paper about yellow perch. Everyone is interested. How come the yellow perch aren't what they used to be?
Not as big.
Not as big, not as many, that sort of thing. So what happened is our research scientist, Marianne Perot, went back into the records and went back not just to 1950, she went back to 1900.
Okay.
And what she found by going back to 1900 is that the river is returning to what it used to be. That the river we remember as some of us as kids, or maybe we had stories about,
Right.
was kind of an anomaly, was an unusual time. And that was due to all of the baby boom growth, the advent of automatic washing machines.
Sure.
So everyone remember that was what every household had to have an automatic washing machine in the 50s, detergents, phosphorus, and inputs that changed that ecosystem. Lots of plants, lots of green algae, lots of fish, because we fertilized the river. But what we're seeing is if we go back far enough, we're seeing that the river is actually returning closer in some ways to what it was, although it will never be the same river because you have now new species in the river like round gobies. So that would be the Coles Note answer to your question.
Okay.
Oh, no.
So I mentioned that one of the projects also that we're working on right now, for the Gen Action one with the map, we're hoping to take a lot of the data that the River Corps has collected for their indicators and include it in that map, so you'll actually be able to kind of experience those changes virtually on this map, and then also future projections, because it really is climate focused. And someone from the city will be hearing from me, because I would really like to have that map installed somewhere in Lamrue Park so that the public can experience all of those things. We haven't gotten to that stage yet, but I would like it to live there, so.
Okay, and just an FYI, I might know a few teachers who may be vaguely interested.
back to you.
Feel free to corner me afterwards at the appropriate time. Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks for the presentation, by the way.
Councillor McIntosh.
Yeah, I was just wondering what role the St. Lawrence Seaway has played in disrupting the pattern. You talk about the eel population declining it sounds like it's rapidly. One time the eels could go back and forth. There weren't any locks, any dams. Is that a factor?
I mean, fundamentally, it's had huge changes, right? The seaway, the creation of the dam, the creation of Lake St. Lawrence, the flooding, the lost villages, all of those changes had enormous impacts. Those were decisions that were made at that time, obviously. So we do know that the seaways had impacts. In fact, one of the research projects we have that I didn't mention, but we're actually looking, and we have working with the Great River Network, which is another group that there's a guest here behind me that's quite intimately has been involved in, is looking at the impacts to the shoreline, and try to really get some solid data on shoreline impacts from those large waves. So it fundamentally changed. I mean, we just in this area, we know it changed the river because of the dredging, because of the changes, the water level control. In some cases, downtown Montreal used to flood on a regular basis, right? And then the seaway has had a role in helping to, alleviate that. So there's some positives and negatives, but from an ecological point of view, it's been fundamentally changed because the river is so different, and the dam situation, because of the Moses Sanders Dam, and has created this large barrier, so sturgeon, for example, can't make it up that river to where the rapids were. There's so many examples that are part of the history, the ecological, natural history of this part of this phenomenal river. And I will say one thing is that we do have to still realize that we have one of the greatest resources in the world just outside our doorsteps. We had a visitor from Australia who was a very famous scientist who gave a presentation in our boardroom, and he told the board directors, He said, "Do you realize there's more water flowing past this window right now than all the rivers in Australia combined?"
I lived in southern Ontario, and somebody told me about the Thames River, and I looked and I said, "Where is it?" They said, "That's it."
Further questions, comments from council? Councillor Sabri.
Just two quick questions through you, Mr. Mayor. The invasive species and that, I go back to the memories of zebra mussels and what it cost to communities. I'm wondering what are the threats that we're looking at from the current invasive species. The other question I have is the remedial action plan. We were environmental hotspots for a period of time. I'm just wondering as to where we stand in that situation.
So invasive species continue to impact the river, and we have new species like one that you probably don't know about called the tench that's making its way. We have something called the tube-nosed goby, and there are other species, and there are probably some microbial species that we don't know about. So they are continuing to sort of essentially reshape the ecosystem. The round goby, if you're an angler, you're probably happy about them because you've never caught bigger bass in your life, and the walleye are doing pretty good too. So, you know, it's not always black and white, but from an ecological point of view, we would like to see the system stay in its natural state, right? And that's one case. With respect to the remedial action program, that plan is moving forward at a measured and slow pace. It's been 30 years, and I don't think anyone thought it would take this long. But what I would say is what has happened in the last 5 years is the reintegration of the programs on the American side and the Canadian side, we say the north side and the south side of the area of concerns, has really come together again. And also the involvement of the people who are in the center of everything, which is Akwesasne, so both the St. Regis tribe and the Mohawks of Akwesasne. So they have come back into the program because for many years they were outside of it. They said, we're not going to be doing this, we don't agree with it. And so gradually they've been brought outside and they've been integrated, and they're contributing in a major way to that program, which I think is the pathway to success.
I'd also like to add that we have a round goby indicator and an invasive species indicator coming out with the Great River Report as well. It's not out yet, but it will be quite soon, so I'll come give you a card so you can check that out on the website too.
Yeah. You got carded.
Are there any other comments or questions from council? Okay. Just like to thank you for your presentation tonight. I had the pleasure of serving as a city council representative to the board of directors a number of years ago. At that time, I think we were talking about the 25th anniversary of the River Institute. So now that we're at 30th, it's great. Time does fly, but congratulations on the great work you do. I mean, I saw the number there, the number of youth that you reach, 5,600. And that shouldn't be understated because we've seen the results of that. I know you've had an impact on many lives of children in the area and the careers they choose, and they're coming back to work at the Rivers Institute. And it has such an impact in our community. Thank you. Can I get a motion to receive the presentation? Or we have the motion. Can I get the vote on the presentation? All in favor of receiving? Carried. Thank you.
Next up on the agenda is Encore Education Seniors Education Center, and here to present is Mr. Duncan McPhee.
Good evening and welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, good evening. My name is Duncan McPhee. I'm the Vice President of the Stormont Dundas Glengarry Encore Seniors Education Center. Thank you for agreeing to receive this delegation from Encore. On behalf of the 450 members of Encore and the Board of Directors, I'm here to make the city aware that financial pressures may result in the loss of this service to the community. The board is also here to request some bridging support from the city while Encore builds a way forward. So the presentation tonight's in three parts. What is Encore and what value does it bring to the community? Number 2, the financial situation. And number 3, looking at a way forward. So, what is Encore and what is the value it brings? Encore Education Center is a community-based, nonprofit organization offering an academic program for older adults. It attracts people who are curious, who want to learn new things. Courses are of an academic nature, as well as health and welfare, safety and security, technology, and financial management. This center, by the way, giving these short type 2-hour courses for adults is quite unique in the country. There are only a few other examples. The City of Montreal has one, the City of Halifax has one, the Province of Prince Edward Island has one, Cornwall has one, and Alexandria has one, which was a spin-off from the one here in town. One of the 450 members that Encore has is a gentleman who comes from Kingston. And 20 times a year, he drives the 2 hours from Kingston to take a 2-hour course here, then drives back again. Why? Because he can't get what he wants in Kingston, despite the fact that they have universities and colleges there. Recently, he called me quite dismayed because he said, I'm here, you're having financial difficulties. I don't want you to close. These courses that are given here in town are predominantly offered in a classroom setting, providing excellent opportunities to socialize and combat isolation. Zoom-type presentations do not seem to fit the bill for these seniors. They want interaction with like-minded individuals. A sizable percentage of Encore attendees seem to come originally from Montreal and other large centers. The majority of the participants in these courses come from professional backgrounds. We have engineers, physicians, financial people, pilots, nurses, etc. They seem to be attracted by the educational nature of the courses. In July 2018, a leading Canadian financial publication, Money Sense, listed Cornwall among the top 10 places to retire in the country. Number 7, actually. Could a service such as Encore Education Center be one of the reasons for this? Now, how many seniors receive this service? In 2019 and 2020, the last full pre-COVID season, 65 courses were given for a total of 3,223 hours. In the last 20 years, Encore has provided 1,300 courses for a total of 64,460 hours of cognitive workout to Cornwall and SD&G seniors. How many seniors, by the way, does Cornwall have? The 2021 StatScan census shows that 46% of the Cornwall population are 50 and over. The learning opportunities offered by Encore help to maintain cognitive health and promote independent living. Longer independent living results in less long-term care. Less long-term care is good for seniors and good for the taxpayer. So let's move on to our financial situation. I want first, by the way, to thank the City of Cornwall for its support over the last number of years through the Municipal Grant Program and also the Social Relief Grant Program. We appreciate it. How is Encore funded? Money comes from course fees, from donations, and fundraising, and some grant monies. Our user fees. Encore charges fees for the courses. These fees never have paid all the bills. And that is not unlike other senior citizens organizations in the city. There's 3 major ones. Those organizations are pretty well the same. Their activity fees do not pay all the bills. Encore was founded in 1994 by the St. Lawrence College with the help of people from McGill, Continuing Education Program. At that time, the college picked up all of the costs, all the administration costs. Over that 10 years following that, however, they lost interest for various reasons, and they handed the program off to the board of directors of Encore to bear the costs. Rental costs and a change in focus by landlords have resulted in 3 moves by Encore in the last few years. Rental costs have soared from, we were paying $16,000 in 2015. Now, although we don't have a place, it would cost us about $36,000 a year. COVID and post-COVID hangover have contributed to this problem. For a while, obviously, we had 0 participants, so 0 course fees. Then when the restrictions lessened, we obviously brought some people back, but participant levels, of course, were down, so reduced fees. Fewer course presenters were willing to come in and present courses for the same reason. Another one is that volunteerism in the last few years has declined to the point that we used to raise $15,000 a year in volunteer work, and now it's down to pretty well 0. Bingo being the latest casualty. In a nutshell, the activity fees have never paid the bills. An attempt to increase the fees last few years, it only resulted in less participation. There's a sweet spot. I want to emphasize here, because there has been, when people talk to me and the other board members, it's about finding a space, and they think that the only problem is the space, which it is. But I want to emphasize is that the problem really is the funding overall. The space costs a lot, administration costs a lot. The way that Encore has stayed in service over the last 10 years is because the board has been working hard to make that happen. And one of the ways that we're doing that was reducing the amount of administration. And reduce administration in the short term is fine, but in the long term, it's going to come back and hurt you. I have the next slide there, which is just going to show some numbers there. In 2015, which was the last year that we were at the college, the revenue was $50,000. The rent was $16,000. Now, on the right-hand side, come up to here, and I'm showing revenue of $47,000, what it would be right now. In actual fact, because of just losing the bingo, that's down to just over 30, and our rental costs are $36,000. So the numbers just don't work. There was probably some reasons why the numbers were higher at the college. One of them might have been that the college, the venue, might have been a better place for this kind of service to be provided as well. It's hard to say. All right, let's look at grants for a moment. The only grants that provide long-term stable funding come from a collaboration of government funders. The Provincial Ministry of Seniors and Accessibility, they provide fairly substantial funding, which organizations can apply against their operating costs. And there are 2 organizations in Cornwall, 2 seniors, that receive those now. And part of that situation is that the provincial provides that funding, and the city will match it to a certain percentage. So globally, it makes a fairly substantial contribution to the organization. We approached, these are called active living centers, and when you get that, the funding comes along with it. We approached the ministry back in the wintertime, and we were told that they were not anticipating adding another one to this area at this time. Now, a way forward. The board has been looking at this obviously very closely, reimagining how this service can be delivered. The critical thing is this, is that the location in itself is not vital. What's important is that it is a safe, accessible, and affordable site. One of the things that came to light, even to the board, was we were in old General Vanier School for a while, for 3 years. The parking was across the street, and watching some people try to get across the street in the wintertime, we lost some people because of that. And also, even when they got inside the building, the distance that they had to go was some distance as well. So accessibility, we began to realize, is extremely important for seniors getting into a building. Now, the board has recently entered into a collaborative discussion with the Seaway Senior Citizens Club here in Cornwall. They have at the moment, they have very little availability, of course, because of the activity base they have themselves. They do have a plan to get an elevator put into the second floor, where they have a lot more space that could accommodate us fairly nicely. Funding is needed for that. That could take a couple of years to do that. Now, there's another one I just want to mention here, and this is brand new for us. It's not up there, it's that new. But we do have a possibility of entering into an agreement with a Cornwall business that would provide us with classroom space at no charge. So that could be a very big step for us, but it's at the very earliest stages right now. We're also, for the minor parts, to try to replace the bingo revenue, we're going to be looking at trying to work with the Nevada tickets, the break open type tickets, that kind of thing. So the way we're looking at this is that it wouldn't be, what we're proposing is something that's not unlike the situation with the other two seniors clubs, the large ones, where the ministry gives a substantial amount of funding. They themselves generate quite a bit, and the city provides some funding as well. For example, if we were to get this free classroom from the business community, that would represent about 1/3 of our budget. Encore itself, we can generate on our own fundraising 1/3 of the budget. So that leaves that amount left there still. Anyway, that's what we're proposing, and it's a way that we think we could save this service for the community. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Before we get to questions and comments from council, there is a recommendation looking for someone to move that to start discussion. Can I get a mover? Councillor Dupel, seconder, Councillor Bennett. Questions and comments? Councillor Hollingsworth. Microphone, please.
Thank you. A couple of questions. First of all, how much money are you looking, how much money are you looking for?
A budget to run Encore full-blown, 5 days a week with 5 days of administration costs about $100,000 a year. So 1/3 of that is about $30,000 roughly.
How many years do you want the money?
The question there would be, it's a bridge, what I'm seeing it as a bridge, is that 2 years, is it 3 years, in order for us to try to find or to get more established funding in the long term. And part of that would be generating more interest in the community and getting more participants.
Right, now, this is gonna go to administration for a report, but as one individual, I'd like to know whether it's 2 or 3, I like to know what the real number is, so I don't know if there'll be some conversation back and forth, but on a personal note, as far as your courses, how much does it cost for me, as a senior, to enroll in any said course?
If it's a single 2-hour course, it's $20. Sometimes a course will run over 8 sessions, 8 2-hour periods, and that's $10 a piece for $80.
Okay. Now, did I hear you correctly? You made reference that many of the people that participated were from Montreal? Did I understand that
A lot
correct?
of large centers, and Montreal is one of them, yes.
Montreal, Ottawa, that type of thing?
Yep.
So the number of users for these programs are from out of town, correct?
Well, they live here, yes. They've moved here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Fair
Well,
enough.
they're not-
I
except for the one-
misunderstood.
Except the one from Kingston.
Kind of gathered they were driving from Montreal, and I thought, well, that's curious to drive for 2 hours, but I've
Just
done it
one
myself.
from Kingston.
Fair enough. Now, the other thing is, typically speaking, you used to get funding from the grants, originally from the Grants Committee, and before the Grants Committee existed, you just got funding as an outside agency from the city of Cornwall when St. Lawrence College stopped funding. Is that making sense?
Yeah, we got, it was not consistent year after year, but there was funding from the city, sometimes in kind,
Right?
yes.
Okay. All right, I'll leave other questions to post-report. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Dupel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your presentation. So I go back to being newly elected as a council member and having Ms. Forrester do a presentation before us here, and it was a great presentation, and I took a lot away from that. So I've always admired the work that Encore Seniors have done in our community. I think for the mind and, the not being isolated for our seniors to be able to have somewhere to go and to do the things that you've done. I've presented once before at Encore Seniors on municipal politics, and I think that the work that you do has been great over the years, and I would hate to see that come to an end. I know that the revenue streaming from bingo, it's kind of taxing on the amount of volunteers you require and how often you need to be there. Although it's a good source of revenue, as you never lose at that on the pooling system that it is. But I will say that over the years of sitting on council, I have seen your group come to the outside agencies at the time, and we're one of the very few groups that showed us a mechanism that you would not be back year after year for funding. And we've seen that over the years, that you've found other streams of revenue. So I'm looking forward to the report coming back from administration. I'm looking forward to supporting your request, because I think that your group does a lot of good for our senior population within our city. And I think that having groups such as yours does keep our seniors more healthy, better wellness balance in life, and being able to get out and be with people they enjoy being with, and to take a course that they're extremely interested in. So I want to thank you for all your good work, the board, over the years, and I look forward to the report.
Councillor McIntosh.
Yeah, I made, I think, 4 presentations over the years. Didn't realize people were paying to hear me. I'm impressed. All 4 of them. No, just kidding. You don't have a place right now?
No, we do not. We were in the Chelsea Mill Code.
Oh, yes.
And they
was there
required
a few-
it, so we moved out, yes.
Okay, so you mentioned this, somebody has a place that they may, Provide?
We're in early discussions with that, yes.
okay. Well, are you very optimistic about this one?
I'm always optimistic.
But I'm just
We're at the earliest stages, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, okay. As Dean mentioned, the administration will come back and tell us. And, okay, fine.
Councillor Good.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you so much for the presentation. Obviously, this is something that serves a large demographic of our population, and so I definitely see the value in it. I do have a question for you. You mentioned that operating 5 days a week, Monday to Friday, that would require about $100,000 annual budget. Is that your goal, is to be operational Monday to Friday, or are you looking to, can you scale that? And is that something that would keep you in business still?
Yeah, the board has discussed this, and obviously, if we ran, let's say, 4 days a week or something, we could scale it back a bit. The more it's scaled back, of course, you save money on administration. You don't save money on the rental of the property. That's the same. One of the things I think that was happening too, when we lost a bit of revenue, when we cut back on administration, is that administration does a whole bunch of different tasks. And one of them is working with presenters and helping to find presenters. So if administration isn't there doing that kind of work, it becomes more difficult to get enough people to make the presentations. But the answer to your question is yes, we've looked at that, scaling back and potentially, let's say, doing a 4-day session. And of course, that would reduce the administration.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. I look forward to hearing the report back from administration here, and I wish you luck with the free rent, because that would be amazing.
Thank you.
Further questions, comment? Councillor McDonald and Councillor Ngunjo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I just wanted to say, I really commend you for having approached the ministry, who is obviously funding the other 2 seniors groups. And I imagine you're part of this senior-friendly community committee?
Yes.
And that's probably not a brainstorming arena for funding, or is it?
No, it's very helpful and very supportive. When it comes down to funding, as far from governmental sources, about the only one that I'm aware of, in the sense that is long-term stable funding that will provide funding for that'll address the basic operating expenses, is really the ministry through the seniors. There's a lot of funding out there. A lot of them are for special programs or initiatives that don't seem to fit into, and they're good, but they don't seem to fit into just paying the operating expenses. And I'll come back to it again, is that every one of the 3 major seniors organizations in the city, the activities don't pay the bills.
Well, I have to tell you, that's typical of city programs as well. But you don't have a tax base, such as we do too. Fact. So the other communities that are running programs, like Montreal you mentioned, and I think Halifax, Prince Edward Island, have you had any discussions with them on how they are funded?
Yes, every one of them, actually. And they fund it in different ways. Some places, they will fund it by charging an annual fee and then smaller amounts. And all of them as well work on on grants of some kind as well. It comes down to, and whether you charge an annual fee and then plus a little bit for the courses, or whether you pay more for the courses, how that developed in the various areas, it could have went the other way as well.
Yeah.
But the same thing applies, that they don't seem to make as much as they need to make. And even though Halifax is a very aggressive situation there, where they have 5 sites actually, where they go and give their courses. Down in Lunenburg and places like that, in Truro, plus Halifax itself. And PEI is the one that was run by the province, but the same kind of situation applies there. It's always a challenge in trying to get enough funding to make it work.
Well, I wish you luck, and I look forward to the report. I think you provide an invaluable service, and I would expect that one of the things that makes us an attractive city for seniors who are retiring is the fact that we do have this to offer.
People are quite taken, actually, when they find out. The challenge we seem to be having still is informing enough of the population that this service is there. We're always surprised in meeting someone, particularly coming from outside, and they say, we never heard about this. So,
Councillor Ngunju.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Through you. Thank you very much for your presentation. We know that Cornwall senior is greater than the provincial average. This has been a special politic for you. Do you have something special that has politic that you apply to serve this large population of senior that we have in our community?
Mr. Mayor, can I ask a question? Is it meant by that question, is there something for the population or the members that come to Encore, that we have something for them, or?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, since we have a large population,
Yes.
do you have any strategy that you put in place to serve the other senior that we have in our community and that that do not attend to your courses? To attract members, yes.
Yes. We have, I mean, we always thought we had an aggressive enough marketing program to get people coming in. The key thing seems to be the different content that the Encore program offers versus the other seniors organizations. And all the organizations provide a valuable service and giving valuable activities for their client base. Maybe because of when you take a look at the background generally of the participants who come to the Encore courses in a professional background, they tend to like, if I could just, if I brought that with me or not, an example of the product that goes out to them. The educational type courses could be something like, just if you bear with me just for a second, King Louis of France, 14th, 15th, and 16th, Wars of the 20th Century, space weather-related topics, human spirit of northern Thailand, major events in Asia, 1941, those kind of topics like that. And the general population that go to Encore seem to really enjoy these. And also, we have a good focus as well on things that are very important to seniors, no matter which area they went to, like health and welfare, about medical advocacy for seniors, cancer prevention, these kind of things, and safety and security around fall prevention, frauds and scams, all of those items there. We do attend as many of the senior fairs as we can get to, and make sure we meet people there and let them know the kind of courses that we have that could be of interest to them.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Another question, please. I don't know if you have a program that you can give to seniors through internet to increase the amount of participants that you have.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, we have looked at that, and there were certain a little bit that we were starting to give. The feedback we were getting from the seniors was that it certainly was not their preferred way of getting something. We began to learn more that I think at one time the board felt that people came to Encore only for the courses, but I think we also discovered that they come there because to meet other people and spend time with them. There was a time when we were thinking about squeezing another course in between the two that were given every day, but then we would have to chase people out of the classroom And that's not a good thing, because they want to be there to talk to each other.
Last question, Mr. Mayor, through you. Thank you very much for your answer. I would like to speak about grants. I was wondering, because did you apply for federal grants? Because I hear that federal has some program to support association like yours. Maybe it should be considered, no?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we have applied both through the province and through, the feds and through the province with Trillium on a number of occasions. In the past, we have got some funding. At the same time, sometimes we're not successful either. The big thing is that most of the programs that are available for funding, they don't address ongoing operating costs. You know, they're for special programs, which are obviously valuable. But in a case where you've got some clients there and you're trying to service them, but you haven't got enough money, it doesn't answer that. And unfortunately, that's a situation with most of the federal and with the Trillium through the province. And the only one that really is helpful, that we can find at least, is the Ministry of Seniors and Accessibility, because you can use those funds to address your daily operating costs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Any further questions or comments from council? Okay, seeing none, all in favor of the motion? Carried, thank you. Thank you for your presentation.
Moving to the consent portion of the agenda, proclamation for Seniors Month. With a recommendation that Council proclaim the month of June 2023 as Seniors Month in the City of Cornwall. Temporary street closure for Cornwall Triathlon with the following recommendation: that Council approve the temporary road closures of Bergeron Lane, Race Street, Cotton Mill Street, and Harbour Road on Saturday, August 26, 2023 from 7 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. And B, Montreal Road from Marlborough to Boundary Road, Marlborough Street from Montreal Road to Harbour Road, Harbour Road, Cotton Mill Street, McConnell Avenue from Montreal Road to Cotton Mill Street on Sunday, August 27, 2023 from 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. Petition, sidewalk on Queen Street, with a recommendation that Council refer the petition opposing the installation of a sidewalk on the north side of Queen Street to administration for a report. Item 5, PAC Report Number 1. With a recommendation that Council approve the housekeeping exercise number 1 to the Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw 2022-001 in accordance with the final bylaw attached to this report for all applicable lands within the municipality. RFP 23-P06 Consulting Services for Digester 1 and 2 Relining at the Cornwall Waterfront Treatment Plant, with a recommendation that this RFP be awarded to R.V. Anderson Associates Limited from Toronto at the total bid price of $217,106.90. RFP Terms of Reference for Building Condition Assessments and Asset Management Plans, with a recommendation that Council receive this report.
Motion? Councillor Bennett, seconder Councillor Hebert. All in favor? Carried, thank you.
Resolutions. Calendar of community events, moved by Councillor Sarah Good and seconded by Councillor Caroline Hébert. Whereas creating a calendar of community events would increase awareness of events happening in Cornwall and promote community involvement. And whereas a centralized location for community members to find information about events would make it easier for people to attend and participate in them. Whereas including a form for community members to submit information about their events would make it easier for event organizers to promote their events on the calendar and ensure that the calendar is comprehensive and up to date. Now therefore be it resolved that the City of Cornwall create and publish a calendar of community events. Now be it further resolved that the calendar include a form for community members to submit details about their events to be published on the calendar.
Councillor Good.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. This came about naturally as it has been a question that has been repeatedly asked of me, both by residents and non-residents, i.e. visitors. Where can we find out what's happening in Cornwall? Where do I look? And unfortunately, there isn't a centralized location at this point. Early in my since becoming a counselor, we did have a community calendar of events on our website, and I had discussions about how the only events on there are garbage pickup. And so I believe that has since been resolved. And so this is coming forward. It was presented as a notice of motion because I felt like a report coming back would not be a productive exercise for staff, and that this was something that I think can be accomplished in-house. I have full faith that hopefully our staff can take the lead and do this as they see fit, and that this would be a wonderful service to both our community members and to visitors coming to the community. Thank you.
Councillor Hebert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm always happy to support anything that will encourage more community engagement, more community involvement from our residents. So happy to second this motion. I just want to make sure that other calendars that do exist are also reflected on this page, on this landing page. For example, your Arts Council has a great calendar referring to all art-related activities, which means I wouldn't want to see staff having to replicate everything in that calendar into this calendar. Maybe we can just link to every existing calendars from our community. The Eastern Ontario Training Board has a calendar for anything employer or job seeker related, workshops, whatnot. So just if we can do a bit of an inventory of all the existing calendars. The library has a great calendar of everything going on there, so that we don't have to duplicate, triplicate any kind of effort, that we just have an additional calendar where everything that kind of falls between the cracks can be added there, but also linking to everything else that exists.
Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to piggyback off Councillor Hebert's comments, the Arts Council does have a really good online one called The Spectacle, and just as you had mentioned in your motion, Councillor Good, that there would be a part where people could log on and fill in their own information. That is something that the Arts Council's website has done. So if we're going to create something to do the other things that go on in the city that aren't art related, it might be worth a conversation with the Arts Council as to how they do theirs and how participants can log on, get their own information on that website. It's no use recreating the wheel. There's something that's already working there, so maybe we can duplicate what they're doing to include the rest of what's going on in the city.
Further questions or comments from council? Okay. Councillor McDonald.
I guess I would like a little bit more definition or shape to this. For example, would you be thinking of events like fundraisers for nonprofits or fundraisers for profits, or like there's so much going on in Cornwall, I think we could pretty well swamp our city website if we were to cast our net really comprehensively. So what sort of parameters do you have in mind? Like if something is commercially advertised somewhere, do we put that on our site as well too, or?
So
what are you thinking?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, my thought is to be absolutely inclusive, but to make this a user-directed input so that it's not putting an extensive amount of work on our staff. So if any community member has an event that they're organizing, they can go ahead and put it in themselves, and it can be vetted. I think, and this is something that came up, that it might be worth creating some kind of policy about no hate groups or hate speech can be allowed. But as far as those different varieties of events, one of the things that I think would be very useful in making that calendar easier to navigate would be having tags, so that when you're submitting an event, you could say, is this a fundraiser? Is it a music event? Is it a family-friendly event for kids? Is it not family-friendly, for example? And some of these different categories that I think would help kind of define what people are looking for, so that whenever event organizers are submitting that information, that people can easily filter through some of those categories and find the information that they're looking for. Because you're right, there are such an abundance of events, and this is really the intent and the thought of it is to be inclusive, but to take the burden off of city staff in terms of the intent is not to say, sorry, I keep referencing to Francis over there because I'm not delegating it to him, but I imagine he might have some part in this. But to reduce the amount of workload, that would be a burden on staff and make it a really self-directed form for people to input their information.
Councillor McDonald?
So I'm just wondering how this would stack up in your estimation with what Cogeco offers, for example, on their, both on TV and, I call it the ticker tape that runs under their programming at certain times of day, where you see if the Lions Club is having an event or if the Legion is having a fish and chip dinner and that sort of thing. Is this what you imagine for the city site as well? Or, for example, the Seaway News has the community listings with, and it's free. Anybody who wants to publish something, whether it's a meeting or a sale or whatever, it's available there.
Through the chair.
Oh, my apologies. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I think that would be something that administration could tease out in terms of the specifics. I don't think that it's necessarily contingent on another events calendar. If an event organizer chooses to publish their event through Cogeco or through various other streams in order to further propel it into various communities, I think that would be excellent. But again, it would be something that if an event organizer wants to have their event published through the city website, that they have a means to do so. And it would be like a calendar, you go on your Outlook calendar. It wouldn't be a ticker tape. It would be a calendar.
Mr. CEO.
I will provide a couple of comments because there is no administration report requested. I think we can do this. I think it will require the involvement of various departments, including, as you pointed out, our communications office, as well as, for example, the tourism office. We do have some experience with providing links, and that they tend to work well because, of course, it removes the requirement for us to ensure that things are up to date. So, for example, if an event is announced and then is canceled, it's not ours to pay attention to. It's actually, the link is there. The link should show that the event has been canceled, or, for example, and people tend to get very upset with us if we're doing it and we don't get that right. Yeah, I think we'll meet with staff and try to come up with the best that we can and put something forward, and look forward to your comments if you have any as we go.
Okay, I have Councillor Dupel, then Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. So part of my question was answered through Councillor McDonald's questions, but my other question is maybe through you to the CAO. Would we know what a cost would be, or would the cost be involved?
Mr. Bolo.
There isn't through you, Mr. Mayor, there isn't typically, so for example, on the tourism website, we would try to put out as much information as possible on what's happening. There is never a cost to do that, and I don't anticipate there'd be a cost to this.
Okay.
We're just trying to put out as much information as we can. I think it's a great idea. I just, I'm looking forward to staff getting together and talking about what we can achieve, but I do expect that it will be, as you've pointed out, the user and the promoter who will be responsible for the details rather than the city, because it's very difficult to keep an eye on every detail.
Just one more thing. I fully support the idea. I think it's a great idea, and I think that having more events posted, and as Councillor Good said, having people submit their own is going to take away from us, and I agree. Having people be able to go onto this calendar and see all the different events is very welcoming in the city of Cornwall, and I'm sure a lot of people will appreciate it.
The only other detail I would give is that we do have experience with this, of course, with employment opportunities. So if a company has openings, again, we hope that they are keeping track on whether it's been filled, as opposed to us with, dozens and sometimes hundreds of openings, that it's not our job to open and close those files.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Your Worship. Probably to the CEO. So if I get this right, we have a community page. Anybody can technically log in and say, I'm having a fundraiser on Friday night at 7 o'clock. How do we vet it? How do we make sure that somebody doesn't put something up there that's inappropriate? Because people potentially could.
Mr. Ball.
Or for that matter, just one step further, is an organization that we as a corporation don't subscribe to their views.
Right.
We're gonna have a trucker rally, and how are we gonna, maybe we don't want to support the concept of a trucker rally, so how do we manage that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. For example, the tourism page, there have been times where there are events that are happening which we wouldn't necessarily want to promote. So I think it's a little bit the same. I think in this case, we may, in this situation, it may be the communications office that is overseeing and may need to vet that detail that is coming through. And so I don't think that it's going to be simply submit and activate. But again, I'm not the expert, so I want to talk to staff about that. But I think someone has to be overseeing, an individual has to be overseeing, and so that not absolutely everything gets downloaded.
Right. Your Worship, I understand the concept, because yes, there have been times when I've wondered about events going on and there doesn't seem to be a spot that's kind of a catch-all. But I'm probably going to vote against the resolution as it's written. If it would have said a report from administration on the feasibility of doing this, I would have supported it, because then I get to see what administration thinks they can do and how it's going to work. I have a few questions, and Mr. Wallows suggested how we're going to manage that. I want to know how we're going to manage that before I kind of support it. The other thing is, and maybe it's because I've been around here too long, but I kind of don't think we don't really have a policy that kind of manages this currently, correct? Like, we don't have a community page policy, correct?
I would probably reach to the ITT office to see what we may have to control that. But again, I don't have that information
I understand
here
that.
this evening. So that may be another office that I need to reach out to.
Right, and that is exactly my problem, Your Worship, in that I'm asking administration questions that they don't know, and how could they know if they haven't had a chance to go and do some review? Maybe we have a policy, maybe we don't, or maybe the policy was written in 1997 when a lot of internet type stuff didn't exist, and so the policy, if there is one, is outdated. I would prefer to see a report with maybe some kind of a policy recommendation about how we manage these things, because I think, speaking as one member, it's conceivable that I have an organization and I want to have an event that the city is not necessarily going to loan itself to. It's not something we want to be affiliated with. And if we put it on our webpage, John Q. Public will think, well, the city's kind of behind this because they have it on their webpage. And I just want to know how we're going to manage that. And because once we vote in this motion, we then are going to have a page that administration is going to have to kind of come up with. And I would prefer to see how we're going to manage it. What are we going to do with organizations that we don't support or don't want to be affiliated with? How does it work from a logistics? Like, do I just log in a way and type in like a forum page that I type in my information and there it is? Or and maybe because I'm not really tech savvy, perhaps I'm missing the big picture here. But I would prefer to see a report that says, here's how we're going to do it. And because that's not what the motion is specifically saying, I'm going to vote against it. Even though I appreciate the idea and agree with the concept, I just don't feel like I have enough information to support it right now.
Councillor Sabri.
I'm just following up through you, Mr. Mayor, on the comments from Councillor Hollingsworth. I am of a similar opinion. I really commend the idea. I really think, like, promotion is a big key to success, and that. But for the good intention of the motion, we don't know the foundations, we don't know the rules, we don't know the logistics of the whole proposal. And I think that has got to be answered, much like what Councillor Hollingsworth is saying to us, and that we're going to open up a door here where we really don't know where we're going to go once we go through that door. I would take it as it's unfortunate that the motion says that no report from council, but I would take it as a friendly amendment, if you would, that we ask for a report from council so we know where we're going.
Are you requesting an amendment, Councillor Sabri?
If they'll accept it, yes.
Madam Clerk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So there are two types of amendment. The first one is a friendly amendment where the mover and seconder are in favor. If that is not a possibility, then an amendment is in order if you get a seconder.
To the mover, are you accepting the amendment?
I will accept the amendment, and I have no issues with a report. I would like to ensure that we're maximizing the time of our administration and that this isn't an exercise in futility, as I believe that even a report would not necessarily include all the parameters of a policy. And I believe that we do have a policy around hate speech, and that we are able to add a disclaimer. I have full faith that these are some of the details that we can trust our administration to work out. However, if it is the feeling of the majority of council that a report would be necessary, I mean, same goal, just more work for them. So sure, if that is what the majority of council would like.
Is the seconder in favor of the amendment? Okay. Can we get clarity on the amendment, Councillor Sabri?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. The amendment is that we go back to a report from administration on this motion.
Councillor Hollingsworth? It's a friendly amendment. We don't require a seconder at this time. Okay. Any further discussion on the motion as amended, or the resolution as amended? Okay, seeing none. All in favor? Opposed? Carries. Thank you.
Reports from unfinished business listing. The first report is vacant land use at 504 4th Street East, the former Bob Turner Joe St. Denis Field. The action recommended, number 1, use space, that council approve Alexander Park at the location for Phase 1 of the proposed development of a teenage-focused use space in Cornwall. And recommendation 2 is that council approved a designation of municipally owned vacant land located at 504 4th Street East for a future affordable housing development and a neighborhood park.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Your Worship. Can I request that we vote on these separately? Because I don't know if everybody necessarily agrees on both of them. So if I don't know if it's in order to make that request, or if I need a motion, or...
I think you're putting forward a motion, seconded by Councillor Good. All in favor of separating these two items for debate? Carried. Thank you. So now we'll, Councillor Hollingsworth.
I'd like to make a motion that we support recommendation number 1.
Seconded Councillor Bennett. Discussion on the motion. Councillor McDonald and Councillor Bennett.
I support this motion. I understand that it's the only way to recoup the major portion of the grant monies that the group that wants to develop a youth center space. It's the only way that the grant can be fully utilized. So I think this is a no-brainer. And in fact, we heard a young woman at the town hall say that she felt it was a good solution to the problem.
Thank you. Councillor Bennett?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Why I'm supporting this recommendation is that the group of teenagers that have been working hard with our police and with the Social Development Council voted 100% unanimously in favor of a phase one. So that's what this recommendation is asking to do. And I think, with all the hard work that this group has put in so far, it would be a shame not to move ahead with phase one. And it begins to address some of the concerns that group has. So I'm 100% in favor of recommendation 1.
Councillor Dupel?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I think that we heard at the town hall meeting that there's strings attached to all fundings that, grants that are given out. But I'm not sure that, I don't know, I still go back to listening to what we heard at the town hall. And yes, I know we heard from one of the youth that said Alexander Park is a beginning. I mean, if that's where council is going, but I really think that we heard loud and clear that Bob Turner site was the site for it, and that we weren't looking, that we were looking at it for affordable housing. And we heard from people saying don't disturb the athletic fields because it's got history, it has everything there. And I don't think if we're going to go with what's before us this evening, I'm not sure that we're listening to the public. I've gotten quite a few emails and some phone calls regarding it, and I mean, I will. It wasn't what I was hoping to see in the report or in the recommendations. So at this point, I'll vote against it.
Mr. Seo?
Yeah, I think just given the comments from the two last councillors, I just want to make the comment that we see this as satisfying the funding application as quickly as possible. We don't think we can achieve a park on the former Bob Turner Joe St. Denis Field site at this time to meet the timelines of the application. If you look at that property, it currently, of course, has a football field on it, and it then has the slab that was the Bob Turner site and the former tennis, and then a parking lot. So I don't believe that we would be able to find a location that satisfies the immediate needs. So that's really why this has been written the way it is. And of course, the report speaks in the second part to allowing a park, a more formalized and larger park, in that second situation, which is a residential and a park. But again, just in a nutshell, we don't think we have room on the Bob Turner Joe St. Denis Field site to meet the application. That's why it's written the way it is.
Councillor Good?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I fully enthusiastically support this recommendation. And if I can just add on to what our CAO has mentioned, it seems that there would be years, I would even guess, before the site, the Joe St. Denis Bob Turner site, would be prepared to house something of this nature. And given the pace at which things move, I would be very, very disappointed to see this project stalled at all, given the incredibly hard work that the youth have put in. And it should be noted that although this wasn't, this site had not been included in the initial report that came back from council with the housing recommendations, et cetera, that this was actually in the initial site tours and the conversations with the youth who were involved. This was identified as their number 2 site. So this is not going against something that the youth are in support of. I think we need to act on this and not wait until our youth aren't youth anymore, because I want to see them enjoying this place. And if I can add as well, I live fairly nearby, and And I've been to this park, and just in an evening being there for about an hour with my son, we saw about 4 different youth, and they were waiting for their friends to come. And it's clearly a hot spot where there's already quite a bit of activity. So I'm very eager. I'm very thankful for all of the hard work that you've done. And thank you so much for coming to the town hall and for speaking about your thoughts around the entire project. I look forward to a phase 2 at some point, and we'll see what happens with that. So thank you.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just going to talk on the recommendation number 1. I specifically asked for them to be divided because I see them as not necessarily connected. They are potentially 2 different animals. Number 1 represents an interim, let's try and do something rather than do nothing. Interim 2, or recommendation number 2, kind of requires a kind of bigger, grander vision. So for my colleagues who say they're opposed, I think what I want to emphasize, at least as I see it, 1 is a temporary or interim kind of recommendation, let's do something rather than nothing. 2 is a different animal. So as I said, I hope my colleagues can support 1. Something is better than nothing, I guess, is the kind of mindset I have with 1, and 2 is a different debate. So thank you.
Mr. Bala.
Yeah, I just want to make one point clear, and perhaps I want to get confirmation from Mr. Jamie Fothrop as well, but I think our thinking was that even though we're hoping to do phase 1 at Alexander Park, I don't think it would be interim or temporary. I think it would actually remain there and be situated more formally and more comprehensively at the Bob Turner site in the future. So maybe I'll look to Mr. Fothrop just to confirm what I've said.
Mr. Fothrop?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that would be correct. The proposal for Alexander Park would be whether a gazebo on site would be a welcome addition to the park for all kinds of uses going forward, even after I guess a larger use space is developed more central in the city.
Further comments or questions? Councillor Gunjo.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I think we have a consensus that we want to create housing and facilities for youth. We also want to commemorate former Bob Turner. But I have a question. I was wondering if maybe you can answer me. It's possible building a public housing in Alexander Park. Is it something that we can think about?
Mr. Boileau.
I don't believe it's, in fact, I asked Mr. Fothrop if Alexander Park was mentioned in the Recreation Master Plan. I don't believe there was anything specific that was mentioned. I also, the Alexander Park is currently a somewhat fully utilized park. It has a soccer, some fairly good soccer programming on that property. It, of course, has a play structure. It's a fairly active park. You could say the same for the Bob Turner and the Joe St. Denis Field, but it really, of course, the history was very multi-sports. The history was everything from baseball to lacrosse to hockey, et cetera, et cetera. And what we currently have is a football program, and it's predominantly that at this time. So to answer your question about residential on Alexander Park, I think the park is being fully occupied with soccer program, play structure, hockey in the winter. There's a variety of things, and perhaps Mr. Fothrop may want to add to that.
Mr. Fothrop.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, a basketball court as well is on site there. It is a location where we do offer the summer playground program for the neighborhood children. The other is Alexander Parks, is a much smaller site. It measures 2 acres, where the Joe St. Denis Field and Bob Turner site is almost 6.3 acres. And so there's certainly a lot more space to work with, which is why the social housing development, it's a candidate for a social housing project.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Further questions or comments? Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, in the youth space, I note that it's for a development of a teenage-focused youth space, and I'm always a little bit leery of the fear of exclusivity and ownership and even territorialism. If we designate a public park as a teenage focus, it doesn't even say youth here, it says teenage. So 13 to 19-year-olds, you're welcome, and it's your playground, but if you're 11 or 20, maybe not so welcome. Like, how are we ever going to manage to make a public space, you know, the preserve of a certain segment of the population? And I take note that there is a graph that shows us that teenagers have expressed a dissatisfaction or a feeling that there is a lack of facilities for them. But I note too that in that report under the bar graph, it says that this is not peculiar to Cornwall, that maybe it's not so much a city geographical factor as it is simply an age factor. No matter where a teenager lives in Canada, the facilities aren't adequate for their desires or whatever. So how are we going to manage that? I guess I'd ask administration that, because we're not necessarily going to hire a security guard to, I don't think, to patrol.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think it really comes down to the features that are being put into a park. I do think that we want to make our parks as inclusive as possible, but for example, the gazebo would accommodate chessboards, electronic plugins for electronics, basketball court. So there can be features that can attract, you know, a graffiti wall. Certain things that are, the features that you're putting in will attract a certain crowd. Of course, you know, we have very small play structures. A wading pool, of course, is not going to attract teenagers and adults. It's meant to be for the younger population. So I think it really depends on the features you're putting at a certain location in a park that are going to attract a certain audience. But I'm not sure, Jamie, if you have anything to add.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think Councillor McDonald's comments are pretty spot on in that we, the intention with park design is to make them inclusive for everybody. So, and the chart you're referencing in the report is one that our consultants who drafted our recreation master plan had provided, and it was just to identify that the teenage demographic is a challenging age group to engage from a city perspective, and so it would be the recreation department's recommendation would be that any park space that's being developed include all kinds of features to engage the youth within the community. I think the message from the proposal, though, is quite valid in that I think teenagers are looking for more, and what can we do more in our parks to engage them? And so it is, I think, the engagement work they did to identify some of those needs. I mean, I would not have thought a chessboard would be a popular amenity for a teenage group, but that it was great to see that. But I think our recommendation would be if this youth space were to be eventually located at the Bob Turner site, that it not just be teenage-focused amenities that get installed there. Our recreation master plan did recommend a neighborhood park there because of the lack of play amenities for all kids within the old square mile. So it would be our recommendation that a playground structure be included in that. And typically, our playground structures are really designed for children 18 months old to 12 years old. So it's really not intended to serve the teenage demographic, but the other amenities like basketball courts, we know are very popular. Public Wi-Fi, charging stations, again, those are amenities we know are popular with them. So it would be our recommendation that whatever park development happens, it be done with an inclusive, from 18 months old to senior citizens, providing, park benches and shade opportunities. Water refill stations, again, are all very popular elements for seniors as well that could be included in that design.
And on that note, I note that there was a reference to Lamrou Park being a possible site. And, if it were, we have a children's play area right almost in the same patch of land. So I'd like a park where every age group, the family can go down and the little kids can play here and the older ones can ignore the rest of the family and, concern themselves over here, as long as everybody's welcome. Place for everybody.
Councillor Dupel.
Just a quick follow-up comment, Mr. Mayor. I fully support our youth. I always have and I always will. I think they're the future of tomorrow, but I guess I'm just disappointed from the very beginning of this, where we all left here feeling motivated and pumped about the location, coming back to an open house where we're still not hearing anything really against the having it go there. So I will support the motion because obviously council as a majority feels that way, but I'm just disappointed as to how we got here.
Councillor Ngunjo.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. I would like to, I have one question. So it's phase one, means we're gonna give the youth the ability to build the project on Alexander Park. Is it true? Yes. What will be phase two, please?
My understanding would be that phase two is actually the Bob Turner property. Now, Mr. Fothrop's report previously also talked about, and I know he feels, and I agree with him, that we may want to, if we succeed, for example, in Alexander Park, these elements may be duplicated wherever council wishes them to be. It can be that we have these elements in Lamrou Park or in Matthias Park or in whichever park. But I believe phase two is the Bob Turner, Joe St. Denis Field with a more formalized setup.
For kids, for youth?
Well,
or
as Jamie just
housing.
pointed out, I think it's to try to satisfy, in the case of the Bob Turner, all populations. And I think of the plan that I sent to many of you of an example in London, Ontario, where that is the case. It is for, autistic children, it is for older adults, it is for young children, it is for, as Jamie pointed out, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Through you, Mr. Mayor, one last question. Please tell me if I am wrong. Is it possible to keep the project of the youth at, what is the name of the park? No. Bob Turner? And keep the name Bob Turner at this park when they'll get their project there. Is it something possible?
Whenever that design and development occurs, absolutely. And that is pointed out in this report.
Okay.
That we are trying to retain the
Does that
names.
mean that we're going to lose housing if we go through this possibility?
Well, the second recommendation speaks to housing. The first recommendation, of course, that we're now talking about doesn't speak to housing. It speaks only to the Alexander Park idea.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm not going to support this.
Further questions or comments from council? Okay, I'm going to make a few. I will support the recommendation, absolutely. I know I was there when we did the site visits. I saw the feedback from the youth. I'd like to thank Constable McGregor, who was leading that effort and really rallying that, and Terry Muir is here as well. And of course, two of the youth members from the committee who are here tonight. Can't forget you. My understanding is in the original proposal, Alexander Park was the second choice. After the site visits for an immediate solution, i.e. Phase 1, Alexander Park was unanimously selected. However, that was for Phase 1. The ideal solution that came out of those site visits was two locations. One being Alexander Park and one being the Bob Turner in the future once we can figure out how to do that, because there's a lot of moving pieces there. We're going to be touching on that in the second recommendation, so I'm not going to, these two overlap in some respects, but not really. That's why they're now separated for two different votes. But I'll comment on that in the next motion. Seeing that, I'm going to call the vote. All in favor of recommendation number 1? All opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, motion carries. Looking for direction for council on recommendation number 2. Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move recommendation number 2.
Is there a seconder? Seeing none, motion does not move. Looking for direction from council. Councillor Good?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. I'd motion to defer.
Is there-
The reason for deferral, obviously, we don't have a seconder to move it, to move the action of the recommendation. I think there is a lot of information that we still have yet to obtain about the logistics of this proposed project. It seems that there will be some time until it is actually going to happen. I believe we need a fulsome review of all of the potential locations where we could potentially develop social housing, and that based on the town hall that we were all in attendance of on Monday, there appears to be quite a strong opposition, and I think it would be very unfortunate for us to ignore that opposition entirely and go ahead and approve this. So I'd like to have more information about the proposal. I'd like to know more about the intended number of units, et cetera, before we make a decision as council. So I will move to defer this. Thank you.
Councillor Hollingsworth, you second? Sure. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Your Worship. Customarily, we debate after we get a mover and a seconder, but so be it. Typically speaking, Your Worship, when we have motions to defer, there's a reason typically provided. We don't just say to admin we're deferring and whatever. So what I would suggest as one individual, and I don't know how my colleagues feel, first of all, we have a field issue, a football field issue, and I know, having spoken to some of the football people, they like an artificial turf field, but they've also said in a perfect world, a grass field for practice, because if they have a turf field, they're going to have to charge a premium to their membership. Well, I don't know what that looks like based on the information we have presented thus far. So I would like to know, A, can we do that? And B, do we have some kind of estimate as to how much money we're talking about here, right? So you can say, well, we'll move them from the Bob Turner, we'll put them someplace else, but $1 million, $2 million, 500, I don't know. So I would like to defer to find out how much that's going to be. The second issue I have, Your Worship, at the town hall meeting, the one young person that talked very elegantly, one question I asked is, could you work with a small park at the Bob Turner Center and have this residential development? And if I'm not mistaken, the response was that may not work very well, because that's the problem currently that the youth have now, that if they're kind of making a little bit of noise, people call the police and say you have to leave. And so that is an option to say, well, we'll have this Bob Turner Park as our second phase with the residential component in there as well. Well, that didn't seem to be the solution that satisfied the group long term. I totally, completely subscribe to the notion of affordable housing. I even think that might be the best site. But I kind of want to know what phase 2 is actually going to look like, Because typically, when we say phase two, historically, we talked about an indoor gym when the pool was going to be built, and that was what, 25 years ago or 20 years ago or thereabouts? We're still waiting for an indoor gym. So until I see some kind of actual tangible plan to say, well, this is phase one and we'll get back to you on phase two, well, the question I would be asking if I was a member of the youth group is, when are you going to get back to us, and what's the time frame, and how do you see that evolving? And currently, there's no real substantial answer there. So the second component about, in terms of deferring, is I would like to know what phase two is actually going to look like. Are we building more structures? Are we offering more programs? And how does that work in light of the residential component? Because that did seem to be an issue. Finally, I guess my point being, defer until I get some tangible information on the football field and how phase two is actually going to look. What's that going to mean? And kind of, can we get some sort of reference in terms of timelines? What's phase two? When is that going to actually happen? So I'm looking for a deferral for information specifically to that effect. I'm hoping that the mover is okay with those suggestions.
Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm supporting this deferral for a couple of reasons. And one is, when I read the report for recommendation 2, it felt to me like the report was written to try and please everybody. Like it was all the best intentions in that report, but it kind of, in just the way I read it, and I'm just one guy here, like it was kind of contradicting itself a couple times. And I don't think it was intentional. I just think it was in the effort to make everybody happy on this space. And let's face it, after the town hall, there were a lot of different opinions as to what should be there or should not be there. And I think we're just getting a little bit too far ahead of ourselves a little bit. And so the deferral, as my councillor colleague, Mr. Hollingsworth said, like what's going to happen with the football fields? Where would the park go? There's a nice diagram on page 193 of the paper report that kind of shows a little bit of a concept of how that would work. And I think I kind of agree with the way that looks. But before you do that, where's the football group going to go? Where are they going to play? Is there a possibility to partner with the new super school for a football field? Is that a possibility? I've heard that kicked around a little bit. The other thing, too, is it feels like we're rushing it, this recommendation, too. And so my question, if I could ask a question about, if we were to decide today that this is a future housing development, and I'm not saying it shouldn't be, but if we said today this is it, well, we haven't built Pitt Street yet. How many years down the road are we realistically looking at before we could even put a shovel in the ground there for housing?
Ms. Morgan?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, part of the reason for us going to all of the councils across SDNG and including the city is because we have approval from this council to hire a consultant this year to do a 10-year development plan. And if we don't designate lands now to be part of that 10-year development plan, they won't get included in this report. And that report will tell us when we need to build, how much it's going to cost to build, how many units we can get, site plan design, surveys, so that all these lands are shovel ready. So when we get funding available, either through various level of governments or reinvestment into the housing revitalization plan, then we will be shovel ready to go. We have 3 developments on the way, and there's no reason why we couldn't continue to have ongoing developments every couple of years through this 10-year development plan.
Okay, so that makes sense to me as to why we're looking for this, because if it's in here, I didn't catch it. My concern is that if we designate this as future affordable housing development in time, that we don't forget this phase 2. Because in my opinion, they both can work on this property. Conversations I've had with some members of admin and some members of this committee seem to think that also makes sense. But if we're designating this tonight, or whenever we decide to designate, if it gets deferred, how can we be sure that phase 2 of the youth park or any park doesn't get lost in that? Because like, could we designate half of it? Is that something we can do?
Mr. Swallow?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, The good thing is that it's city-owned.
Yep.
And so council can decide the proportions. So, we would probably come back to you with a design, and if you weren't satisfied, I mean, the neighborhood park is part of the design of what is being proposed. So you've got a residential piece, and then you've got a neighborhood park piece. And by the way, the neighborhood park that is proposed here, I think Mr. Fothrop can tell you that this is a fairly good-sized park that we're showing you. Now, there are no dimensions to what you're looking at, but you can get a very good-sized park on this site. As pointed out, it's 6.3 acres. So we're talking about a large property. And I also want to point out that if anyone thinks that we should be considering this for only recreation, there's a lot of land here. So certainly it's not just a neighborhood park. You might be considering, for example, keeping the football field here and working around it, that sort of thing. But I mean, we can't occupy 6.3 acres with neighborhood uses. It's too large in that sense. So to answer your question, the report has been written without giving specific details on the size. It does mention 5 acres, for example, residential, 1.3 for a park, but the city owns it. It's not like this is a plan of subdivision that we can't, you've gone too far and you can't go backwards. The council can always decide whether, do you want a third, 2/3, do you want more than that or less than that? So I think what Melissa is looking for is that council decide that a residential development can occur on this site. The details would come back. And if council felt like, 3 acres was what you thought it should be, well, that's the answer to the people who design. So they're left with 3.3 acres for residential, 3 acres for a neighborhood park. So that's really what the report is trying to do is, as she has pointed out, there is, are we going to build this next year? Not likely, but it's got to be in the inventory for them to consider for the future. That's really all it is.
I appreciate that answer.
Okay.
I really do. So my biggest concern with this was that we're locking ourselves into one or the other. So this sounds to me like if we designated it, we still have control as to what goes on it. So if we designated this property and it gets onto our list, 3 years down the road, we say, okay, we've got a grant, we're ready to build. At that time, we can say half the site, third of the site. So we're not locking ourselves into any sizes with this. And that's the way I'm hearing what you're saying.
Well, I can say that there was the recommendation did have some numbers in it previously, and what we've done is we've written it so that it's really up to council.
Okay. Okay, I appreciate it. I'm good with the deferral, if my council members, colleagues need more information, but I think I'm comfortable with that, myself to vote with this recommendation, with that information, knowing that we're not losing anything for the youth, because to me, this space needs to have that component. So I'll go along with the deferral to get the more information if the council requires, but if not, I could also go back and vote on this recommendation.
Councillor McIntosh.
We're talking about second phase, but I thought the original plan when they came to us was they were only looking at one park, and that was the athletic grounds. And now we're talking phase 2. There was no phase 2 when at the original one. When did phase 2 come into the picture?
Mr. Waller?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Really, it came with having the application and having the timelines that we have, realizing that we can't make use of the application on this site at this time because we have a football program that takes a majority of the property. The balance of the property is concrete and asphalt. Not easy, could be environmental issues. So we need to go to an alternate site, do things immediately, and then come back to the site whenever the development is, so you can deal with the environmental issues in a much larger,
we're
comprehensive.
talking a pretty lengthy time frame here. We're talking about replacing the football field, and I see where we're gonna put aside, the recommendation is to put aside money to get $3 million, and we're probably underestimating on artificial turf at that price. And the development of a field, and the original plan too for the Benson Center were soccer fields too. So it's a massive development, and we also bought the CN property to accommodate all this. So we're like 5 years away.
I don't know that we're 5 years away, but there are a lot of parts to this. The critical piece is that we can't move this football program till we find a home for the football program.
Correct.
And so it is taking up a majority of this property. And so where do you put a park on this site and continue to have a football program?
Yeah, like the football field issue has to be solved first.
Yeah.
And
Unless, of course, you were to spend the money on removing the slab, the environmental costs that go with it, et cetera, which could be, fairly expensive. And is that the real best place for a park? I would say that the better place for the park is where we've shown it.
Alexander, I used to call it 8th Street Park.
Yeah, but on this site, a more visible location at the corner of 4th and Marlborough.
Yeah. How many housing units do you think you can get in there with
It really, through you, Mr. Mayor, it really depends on how many acres we're talking about, but probably, I'm going to say 50 to 100, but maybe Melissa can provide some detail.
And, yeah, just before Melissa answers, they would be mostly young families, wouldn't they?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, the type of housing we put in there will be all dependent on the type of housing we need at the time, whether it's families or singles. Certainly, we have been endeavoring to create mixed communities now so that we're trying to be inclusive for everybody, not necessarily just singles, but singles, families, children, seniors. And again, to the CAO's point, depending on what we want to build in that site, currently on our Pitt Street site, we were just over 4 acres and we got 81 units in there.
Okay, so there'd be a number, probably about 150 people living there. And when we have subdivisions with 80-some units, we require the developer to provide a park. And we would be following the same, idea that we're putting a development here. We said to the private developer, you have to have a park. Well, we have to have a park too. Okay? And
that's
I would
correct.
think that park would be a passive park in most cases.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so certainly what we're trying to do is align with the Recreation Master Plan. It has determined that whatever goes on that site requires a neighborhood park.
Yeah.
And certainly that's what we're endeavoring to do too. We don't want to take away the space for any neighborhood park.
I'm just trying to visualize a park, passive park, what we're talking about, and a youth park. They coexist? I doubt it. I'm fully in favor of the Alexander 8th Street development, but I'm just wondering if we're going to put a housing development there, if a youth park could coexist in a development.
I do want to point out, and perhaps Jamie can add to this, but if we were applying the normal parkland dedication to a size, a property of this size, we'd be talking about a much smaller park than what we're talking about. This is a very generous, even at 1.5 acres, is a very generous. Typically, it's 5%.
Yeah.
So you're looking at a considerably smaller one if we're dealing with a developer.
Yeah.
What we're proposing is substantially more than that.
Yeah, okay. The 8th Street or Alexander Park idea, let's go ahead and do that. And I think we're getting ahead of ourselves by talking about phase 2 when phase 1 is in the very early stages. And when it comes to the athletic grounds / Joe St. Denis Field, it's sort of like in Boston, if they decide to tear down Fenway Park, put put a bigger park in there, all hell would break loose. And I can understand what people who see that park as a nice centerpiece in the community. It's a great location. And there isn't an abundance of park space in that area. And one of the reasons why is when we build subdivisions, they provide a park. So every subdivision that has new homes has a park. And that's the way it works. While in the older part of the city, where maybe don't have the number of the park space per capita that we have in subdivisions. But anyway, it's so far, it's down the road. Anyway, I'm quite happy with going ahead with the Alexander Park and see what happens in the next 4 or 5 years.
Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, well, I obviously support the motion to defer as well, since the motion to approve the second recommendation didn't fly. And I'm really happy in the interim, just in the short period of time since that motion didn't get a seconder, the discussion around the table seems to be about what is in recommendation number 2, which is a housing development and a neighborhood park. This is the ideal. We've got 6 acres there, and surely we don't just have to concern ourselves with the games that kids could play there. We have to concern ourselves with the beds they need to sleep in as well. I mean, we're trying to develop a response here to the space that's available to us to serve the whole community. And the kids who would be served in a park are also the kids who are served in a housing development. So I'm really happy that there seems to be a feeling around the table that we can manage both. In 6 acres, we have to manage both. And unfortunately, when I was listening to Councillor McIntosh, I realized you think it'll be 5 years before we would move a football field to the Benson Centre if we did. And I think that you might be right, given the realities of the situation. But it seems to me we don't have that kind of time. We don't have 5 years to move on housing. We've had a housing report here that, I mean, it keeps getting kind of backburnered in a way through 3 council meetings now. I'll count the town hall meeting as a 3rd meeting, where it doesn't get the same focus that the athletic possibilities of a neighborhood park, a teen-centered park have. And I think this really takes away any possible balance that we could have in looking at this situation, because we've been focusing strictly on the sports angle. And I would like more time so that hopefully all the comments and the research and the remarks about housing that are contained in the response to the initial motion 2 meetings ago and a town hall meeting ago, so 3 meetings ago, that has to see the light of day sometime too, because we had almost 2 hours of a town hall meeting focusing strictly on the sports angle. And I remember when we developed the Benson Centre, we did it because we were going to tear down the Bob and the Cy Miller. So we tore down those 2 facilities, but we didn't leave a big hole in the sports facilities in the city. We created something that I think is greater probably than both of those were. We have the Benson Centre. So it's not as though we're looking at a loss of sports facilities. That's an empty, vacant land right now, and it's ripe to serve community needs, all the community needs. And I think that picture on 193 showing the neighborhood park and all that space that could be a housing development too, that's a fabulous picture. Now, I don't know why council can't get behind it, but I hope that given time after the deferral, the council will, because, hey, we're building a city here for everybody. That's all.
Further questions or comments from council? Councillor Sabri.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When we didn't have the seconder for the second recommendation and we started the debate on the deferral, I thought to myself, this is rather interesting. And I'm going to quote from Tyrone Lannister from Game of Thrones. It must be a good compromise. Nobody is happy. And that, because there we were discussing the housing situation. Ms. Morgan partially answered one of my thoughts and one of my questions with regards to an inventory or addressing the deficit of the social housing and that. And I find it interesting, we're going to be spending money on addressing the needs of social housing at a time that we know that the provincial funding is drying up, that there's not going to be new money, not in the foreseeable future. So the question becomes one of, we're doing this study for shovel-ready projects if the money comes there with the money drying up. And at the same time, it's basically a question of what and when there might be, or what pressure is going to be put on the province to actually inject new funds into social housing so we can address this deficit. The report, if we include the property at 4th Street, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're committed to it. It can be drawn out of that inventory at any time. Am I correct in that? Yeah. This other point with regards to how things evolve with time is that the city is growing east, west, north. And the thought there is when we built the Benson Center, it was to replace some structures that had become aged and to try to find a central location and to give the community the best sporting facilities necessary or that we could afford at the time. I still suggest that there is a recreation deficit in the city because the people in the East End are being asked to go to the West End, and their needs are not necessarily being addressed there and that. So if we are going to put a deferral on this, which we have no other choice because the motion has died and that, I think we should put everything on the table and we should look at addressing the deficit with regards to the recreation and possibly bringing something back that was once there. And that could very well be a covered open-air arena, or it could very well be another facility. Because remember, the Bob Turner Center wasn't just an arena, it was also a meeting place. There was an awful lot of activities that were happening there. There was a great deal of programming. And I don't see that all happening at the Benson Center right now. So, for all intents and purposes, if we're going to defer, which we are going to do, then I think we should open the door wide open as to the options there and that. And we'll have a better view or some vision for what we really need to address at that property. Those are my thoughts.
Mr. Barlow?
If I could ask council to provide a bit of information of, or they may just wish to defer it, but we'll likely put this onto an unfinished business list, which could take months to come back with. So if there's any, like I've heard things like cost and design and the plan that Melissa is going to be working with a consultant. So at what point do we want to see it come back? I know Jamie Fothrop could probably work on, for example, what is the cost to move the football program to the Benson Center? What is the timing of that? I think perhaps he can do that. And if you're looking for more information from Ms. Morgan about that housing plan, and if you're looking for more information from Mr. Fothrop about the moving of that field, etc., I think we can do that and probably come back to you, I don't know, in a couple of months, maybe less. But is that when council wants to come back? Is at that point?
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Your Worship. The only sense of urgency is in light of the fact that we're hiring a consultant, as expected by Ms. Morgan. So to me, that, and as one member, that's the real deadline, right? So if we need to decide what we're doing, are we building houses there or not, and that needs to be done 2 weeks from now, then I guess that's ultimately the deadline we have to work with as one member. If the consultant needs to know that 6 months from now, well, that kind of moves that target, right? To me, that's the only really pressing issue, because I think we can all agree we're probably not going to put apartments up there in a month's time, right? We're probably not going to do it in 6 months' time, regardless of what the consultant says. As far as phase 2 goes, we've talked that as well. I think let's get the first phase actually up and running. We're talking about building a gazebo and chess and electronics and all that stuff. That's not, we're not going to do that and then a month from now do that. So to me, the real question isn't to council necessarily, but rather to our housing manager in terms of what's the deadline, like when do we have to decide vis-a-vis this report? That's how I see it, unless my colleagues see it differently, but that to me is the real pressing deadline, and everything else is kind of fluid.
Ms. Morgan?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, because the housing manager and I need to go to every council to ask for vacant lands, most of these reports won't be completed until mid-August, which means we won't be hiring a consultant till sometime in September. And by the time we give them several weeks and months to complete all of these site plans, then we probably won't be prepared to come back to council till the end of this year, beginning of next year. And if council chooses to put this land as part of that report, to come back with a report for the deferral, then we can do that as well.
Councillor Good?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. That is an important constraint, I think, for us to be mindful of, definitely. And I don't know if this is something that should be done in an in-camera meeting, but I think it would be a worthwhile exercise for us as council to review all of the potential sites within the city that could accommodate social housing. It's obviously a need that we have, and looking not only at the lands that we currently own, but at possible lands that could be acquired and what would be involved with acquiring them. So I would like to have a fulsome discussion about what we need to progress in constructing social housing within the city. And I think that making this decision without the context of that information, we're missing something. And so I appreciate that there would be some time involved. Another question that I have, if I can direct this, I'm not sure if the CAO or someone else knows this, but I had heard that there may have been money specifically fundraised for the fields, separate from the actual Benson Center itself. Is there a pot of money currently for the fields specifically?
Mr. Wallo?
I am familiar with the soccer program contributing money for soccer fields, but I'll ask Mr. Fothrop regarding the football program.
Mr. Fothrop?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, there is some funds that have been raised. Perhaps Ms. Bailey can confirm the amount that the city has.
Ms. Bailey?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I haven't looked at it recently, but I believe it's around $300,000 that the city has in an account set aside for soccer fields.
Perfect. That is exactly the number that I heard, so that checks. Good. Well, I'm happy to hear that we do have some funding for that. I think, again, it requires a more fulsome discussion. They're two very separate things as far as moving the fields and what is involved in that, and then in determining which lands we're going to designate for social housing. So I look forward to hearing back, and I'm hopeful that you'll answer the many questions that we've presented tonight. Thank you.
Further comments or questions from council? I too am in favor of the deferral at this time. Obviously, there's a lot of questions that arose from the table today. One item I'd like to add to that is the petition that was given to us at the town hall. We're due to receive that and refer that to administration for a report as per our petition policy, but it's tied into this item specifically. So when we do have that debate, we should have it in front of us, because we haven't had a chance to see that yet in an official capacity, and that's part of the input we received. So that's another reason I think to defer as well. I have other comments that I'd like to make in regards to this, but typically I will comment during the actual debate, not during the deferral, so I'll reserve my comments for the time when we actually make a decision on this. Seeing no further comments, all in favor of the deferral? Opposed? Deferral carries. Thank you.
Our next report is your Arts Council request for financial support with the following recommendation. To provide council with information regarding the request by your Arts Council to enter into a memorandum of understanding and a multi-year funding commitment from the City of Cornwall in the amount of $25,000 per year as presented by Mr. Richard Salem to council at its May 8th, 2023 meeting. And the next recommendation is that council provide direction to administration.
Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to make the motion that we ask administration to negotiate an MOU with your Arts Council for a 5-year period.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Okay, seeing none, the motion does not move forward. I am entertaining other motions from council. Councillor Good.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. I would move a similar motion, but that we arrange to have an MOU for the period of 3 years, given that we have an art center that's being constructed and we don't know what the future is like for funding. I would prefer to see a shorter time period.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Bennett. Debate on the motion. Councillor Hollingsworth.
I'm going to vote against your worship for 3 reasons.
Microphone, please.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, my apologies. I'm going to vote against the motion, your worship. I don't want to fund the Arts Council for 3 reasons. First of all, typically speaking, when the city had a grants program, the old previous version of the grants program, the premise was we provide an organization with seed money, and the idea is here's some money, it's a great idea, we think it's great, here's some cash, but realize that this is seed money. We will fund you for a year, 2 years, whatever the number is, but it is incumbent upon you to eventually become self-sufficient. We have another group this evening that has now taken seed money and is looking for us to make it their funding kind of revenue stream. That was never part of the grants program. That wasn't the original point of the grants program. It was to help a really good idea get up and running and flourish. So that's the first reason. Second of all, your worship, if you look, and Ms. Bailey, correct me if I'm wrong, when that presentation came and I asked how much the membership was paying in terms of membership fees, was the number not free?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I recall that there wasn't a membership fee
Okay.
as well.
Sorry. So secondly, your worship, if you subscribe to a concept or an idea, you pay a membership fee. When I played golf, I paid a membership fee. When my kids played hockey, I paid a membership fee. If I decided I wanted to get into shape, I paid a membership fee. The idea is that people support concepts and ideas with their hard-earned cash because they subscribe to the idea, they believe in it, they think it has merit, and they cut a check, whatever that number may be, $5, $10, $20, whatever the case is. And I always, historically, when I first got elected, I referred to my parents who lived on the corner of 6th and Marlborough, and I still think of people who live in the city. Why is it incumbent, why should they be the ones to pony up the money for this program when they potentially don't reap any reward from it whatsoever? The final reason, the final real core issue I have here is that if you look at the budget that was presented to us, the expectation is the city is going to fund, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Billy, $25,000, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe that's, yes, annually, the ask.
So we're going to give this particular organization $25,000 in perpetuity, or 4 years, depending on the motion. So let's say 4 years, or 3, or whatever the number is. And yet, it's supposed to be a regional arts council. And our colleagues in the counties, various neighboring counties, have only ponied up $1,500. Does that seem fair to anybody around this table? Why is it the city of Cornwall's responsibility to carry the load for this particular arts organization? I'm all willing to commit our fair share, but there's no fair share here. We're doing 25 and our neighbors are not. Now, I know that, if I'm not mistaken, that the counties did give some money to Apples and Art, if I'm not mistaken. What was it, $6,000 or something like that, Miss Bailey, if I can remember correctly?
Yes, I think in their budget it was about $6,000, and also they have approached Akwesasne for funding for specific events in
And so,
Akwesasne.
that being said, I guess I could support a specific event that benefits the citizens of Cornwall in the city of Cornwall. Sure, here's some money for this event that's located in Cornwall, that benefits Cornwall, that helps the downtown or wherever other organization. I could do that, but just some blanket funding, and then to have our neighbors not really be expected to come up with their share. And in fairness, they, for whatever reason, don't think it's important to them. But I don't think we should be the ones always, it feels, that we're often the ones carrying the load. And I don't think it's fair to the residents of the city of Cornwall to be burdened with the only kind of organization that's really doing the heavy lifting. If somebody said, hey, it's a 50-50 deal, and okay, sure, that sounds great. Arts are great and terrific. I love the arts. I play a bad version of guitar and do some not great sketching myself. But the point is, this is a dollar and cents issue. It's a dollar and cents issue. And I think that members should pay a little bit. And I think neighboring communities who potentially benefit from some of this should also pay a little bit. And that reason, Your Worship, I'm just not going to support this particular motion as it is presented. And I'd love to see what our neighboring municipalities would be prepared to do if we didn't pick up the funding. So no disrespect to them, but it's not incumbent upon us to do all this, to take this on ourselves, in my opinion. Thank you.
Councillor McDonald and Councillor Hubert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, I've got a question of Mr. Fothrop. Of course, with regards to the Arts Centre that's coming on board, I know that you spoke in the past of anticipating the grand opening by a year or so higher prior to the opening of somebody who would be an artistic director or somebody, in any case, who'd be ready to prepare the ground so that the Arts Centre is going full tilt the day it opens. Now, how do you see that role meshing with what the Arts Council is proposing?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think the role of this position will be to provide certainly arts and culture programming for the city at this facility, and as well support others. I guess I wouldn't be able to say that they would be able to do everything that your Arts Council is doing. But for sure, I mean, at the moment, we have staff that provide our arts and culture programming, but they are also responsible for looking after our summer playground program and a whole variety of the programs we offer. And so I think this position will be focused purely on arts and culture related initiatives. So our hope is that we'll be delivering certainly a much greater service offering for the arts and culture sector. And I guess, yeah, it was our intention to hire this person a year in advance of the facility opening. So as construction's getting started, we will be watching that schedule and looking to start that recruitment process as we see ourselves approaching a year out of that opening date.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for that. And I have to say I'm sympathetic to the points raised by my colleague, Councillor Hollingsworth, because so much of what the Arts Council does really is done on a regional basis. And even one of the great successes being the Glass Studio in Alexandria. That's in Alexandria. And Apples and Arts, which is a regional activity and a regional tourist magnet. So I would like to build in a consideration that if we're going to support it, that there be regional support, that the counties contribute something to, because it's fair. We're talking City of Cornwall tax dollars here, and they should be, I think, concentrated in the City of Cornwall. I like the idea of a 3-year term rather than a 5-year term, but maybe even a 2-year term, because I imagine the Arts Center, surely it's going to be, surely in 2 years. They have started, I know, the front has come down. So,
Thank you. Councillor Hebert, then Councillor McIntosh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So just to, I guess, I don't know, react to some of the comments made so far, specifically if someone lives at such and such address in the city of Cornwall and they're not a member, they don't reap the benefits of your Arts Council. I think your Arts Council is an organization that benefits not just those who are members, but the entire community who decides to leave their homes and attend these free public events. So I think everyone is going to benefit from their events if they're willing to actually attend. They're open to the public. They're hosting free arts on the weekends for youth. I think these are really important events that I don't know if our eventual arts coordinator would have the capacity to organize, but I think that we need to realize that this is more than just membership based. This is public events for all in SDG and Cornwall. But if we recall not long ago when we had our presentation requesting this funding, it was quite clear that the majority of the events and the benefits were within the city of Cornwall. And so I would never be opposed to having, a share through the counties as well, but I would love to see a breakdown of the percentage that is being of the operations and the events and the artists from the city of Cornwall versus the United Counties. And I guess I think of the way the Raisin Region Conservation Authority funds are spent through all of the counties, or the townships and the city. So there's general benefiting, which means this is an event, or this is a project, or this is a land in the RRCA's case that benefits all of the townships and the city, and so that's kind of split evenly. And then there are other projects that are special benefiting. So the campsite in South Glengarry, obviously everyone kind of benefits there, but predominantly is going to get some funds distributed by that specific township. So there's, that's calculated annually, and so we pay our share depending on how much the RRCA's operations benefits the city of Cornwall. So I'd love to see that similar kind of calculation done for the city of Cornwall and the United Counties, and I bet you it's probably significantly more within the city than it is within the counties. So, I mean, never opposed to having that shared, but I think we'd still be probably dishing out near the $25,000 mark, which I think, yes, we have to be nickel and diming because of the affordability crisis, but at the end of the day, it is a small price to pay for the amount of great work that this organization is doing. It's wild to think that they can even have paid staff at this kind of cost. So I think it's a big bang for our bucks. So I will support the 3-year MOU. If that doesn't pass, I'll support a 2-year just so we can get the ball rolling for this organization. And if we need to have conversations at some point about if there's any overlap between the new arts coordinator and arts council, I think we cross that bridge when we get there. Until then, we don't have an arts coordinator. This organization is doing the work, I think, beyond what an art coordinator would do for our municipality. So I support the 3-year MOU and funding your arts council.
Councillor McIntosh.
I couldn't have agreed more with what Councillor Hollingsworth said about the imbalance when it comes to the counties. The population is 60,000, I was 47, and it seems that everything like this comes up, they nickel and dime, and we kick in the lion's share. I don't want to beat this stuff, but the airport's a good example. Anyhow, over the years, we've given the Arts Council 160,000, whatever. I would love to know what the counties has kicked in compared to that. I bet it's a lot less. When Councillor Hebert talks about the Raisin Region Conservation Authority, the assessment's based, I believe, on population. I could be wrong on that, but I think it is. And when it comes to the campsite, it produces a profit, and the marina produces a profit, so it really doesn't require any tax dollars to operate. The arts coordinator, didn't we put that in the budget at one time for the arts center?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, we did put it in the budget, but we did say that we would not.
Yeah, there was some debate. We were going to hire the person right away, and
Well, it was the intention to
Yeah.
hire it a year so that we could program the facility so that when the doors open.
So the intention was to
activities-
hire a year in advance.
Yes.
And that is still the intention.
That's
So we're talking maybe another year from now, we'll be hiring our arts coordinator. What kind of money did we put in the budget for an annual salary?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I can't exactly recall, but I'm going to
80,000?
say it's probably in the 75,
Yeah, I thought it was 80.
85 range.
But, and if we have an arts coordinator a year from now, and we give a 3-year contract to your arts center, we're really duplicating things, because if somebody's being paid 80,000 a year, they shouldn't have any trouble coordinating all the things that the arts center is doing now, and plus run the. They're not going to be the arts center too, because it's all packaged. It's all going to be part of the package. I'm not in favor of the 3-year. I could go a year, and also, Ms. Bailey, or through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mark, we're talking about the 25,000 be for this year, even though 6 months is up.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's at the direction of council, so right now it's $25,000 a year.
Yeah, the motion is per year starting this year, which means it'd be
Correct.
retroactive for 6 months. So they'd be getting 25,000 this year.
Or it would be $25,000 from this budget, but next year's payment might not be until this time next year.
Yeah,
as an example.
I guess what I'm coming at, the genesis of my argument here is that we pretty sure we're going to have an arts coordinator added to our city payroll at 80,000, maybe that'll include benefits. And at the same time, we're talking funding your arts council for 3 years. And we think that our arts coordinator could, it might be Mr. Salem, who knows, could do the same thing. So I'm not in favor of going to 3 years, because I can see the overlap there. I could say 1 year, and then we'll take it from there. If we haven't got an arts coordinator, and for some reason the gods aren't smiling on us, the arts gods, and we're still working down on Pitt Street trying to get it open, fine, we'll extend it another year. But only until we get once we get an arts coordinator in place, that's it. We got the person on our payroll, and we're not paying double. Well, it's not going to be double, but we're not shelling out 25,000 for a person to do what our arts coordinator can do. So I'll vote against the 3 years. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Okay, I have Councillor Bennett next, and Councillor Good.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. There's an awful lot to unpack there. Most of the impact that this organization has in our region is felt right here in the city of Cornwall. Don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I would have to guess that pretty close to 90% of the impact is felt right here in the city. You look at Apples and Arts, yes, it's regional. Most of the studios are here in the city. If the people are coming to the area to do that particular program for that weekend, and they're staying somewhere, well, they're not staying in Lancaster, and they're not staying in Martintown. They have to stay here, and they're going to eat the food in the restaurants here. Art Walk, right downtown Cornwall, huge benefit. Cornwall Art Hive has been spreading its wings everywhere. It's been getting into Akwesasne. It's been getting people together to do art, because guess what? Not everybody plays hockey. Shocking. Conquer the Canvas is another event that COVID has put a short kibosh to, but hopefully there's a return to that too, right here in the city of Cornwall. Minor hockey, minor sports, and generally speaking, they get a discounted rate on our facilities, as they should. There are no arts organizations for the kids in our communities. This group provides those opportunities by bringing all the artists that are members of this organization together, which, by the way, they never were together 10 years ago. It was the most scattered thing you could imagine. And this group has done a lot to get them all on the same page, realizing that if there's one person is successful, the other person is successful. And if they're successful, then the city of Cornwall is successful as well. The idea that, you know, contracts, you can negotiate an out clause. So we're worried about hiring an arts coordinator a year or two from now, then negotiate an out clause. If an arts coordinator is hired by the city of Cornwall, then we can terminate this contract within, I don't know, 6 months, give it a time. But out clauses are possible. The TRIUM economic impact model that the province uses for economic impacts of arts groups or arts events and whatever within the province tells you that $1.3 million of economic benefit is created by what this group does. $1.3 million. It's going to cost you 25 grand to get that kind of benefit for your residents. And if it does impact the outlying area, so what? So what if Long Sault is successful? Go down to the Prince Edward County and go around there and see what their arts council has done. That's a tourist destination for arts programming. They got studios everywhere, and they're doing it as a hub, and that's where people go. Wouldn't it be a shame if Cornwall was a destination for arts? My God, what would we do with all those people here visiting, spending money in our town? Crazy thought, crazy thought. Some of these, you know, we talked about earlier, somebody mentioned how we have to explain to a resident how their tax dollars is going to an organization they're never going to use. Well, guess what? A lot of my residents, myself included, I'm paying taxes for schools. I don't have any kids anymore. But I have to do that because I understand that the greater community good, I have to help pay for that. That goes with libraries. I can't remember last time I stepped foot in the library, but for God's sakes, the rest of this community needs one. So the list goes on and on and on. And the organizations that went through the municipal grants program, I can think of 2 events in particular that have gone past the 3 years because the community decided, the council decided, that these were great community events that should be funded in perpetuity, and that would be the Santa Claus Parade, the Rib Fest. They started in that program. Guess what? They're not in it anymore because we saw a value to it. So to use most of the arguments I heard tonight as to not to do it, to me is just, and I don't mean any offense, it just seems so short-sighted to me when I'm looking at the impact of a provincial model that shows me 1.3 million benefit right now is being generated. How much more is that going to be if we actually turn this area into a hub for this kind of activity? This is just a win-win situation for me, and I would support it all day long. Thank you.
Councilor Good, I have you next, but I was going to allow you to wrap up. So before I go back to you, I was just wondering if there's anyone else who hasn't spoken yet. I'd like to give them the opportunity. Councilor Gunjo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, through you. Speaking about art, it's a very important part of a community. And I really appreciate what this organization is doing for our community because it's very important. It's not only a matter of money. I understand this point. It's very important to manage money as it should be. That is very important. But at the same time, we have to keep our community very attractive for other visitors. And I think it's a good tools that we have with this group. They're doing pretty good job in our community. So I think we should support art. It's not only about money. It's a win-win, as Councillor Todd just said. It's a win-win position. So I'm going to support the 3 years, but I'm going to add or ask that we check how this money is going to be used or what will be the impact in our society, in the city, how we're going to assess how the event will attend, because it's very important. We're speaking about tax money here, so we need to know how this money is going to be used, how you're going to use that, what you're going to do with that, how many people are going to attend, because it's the resident money, we need to check what's going on. So 3 years, I'm going to support that, and I'm pretty sure that it's a good win-win, how can I say, project that we have for our community. So thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Any further comments? Councillor Sabri.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. I'm really torn on this because I do support the arts community. I do understand the value, and as Councillor Bennett has pointed out, what it brings to a community and that. I also tend to lean towards Councillor Hollingsworth in that there should be fair freight here all the way around for the benefits of all. When you look at it, when you look at the budget that they have proposed, and you see that in addition to the City of Cornwall asking $25,000, they come again to the Tourism Development Corporation of Cornwall for $1,500. And then you have the Downtown BIA, the Cornwall Art Walk sponsorship, and they're going there for $13,500. So you start doing a little bit of math in that, and there's knocking on a number of business doors in Cornwall looking for support. And it's kind of like there's only the one taxpayer. We keep hearing about that all the time. Well, they're coming at them 2 and 3 different ways. And then when you take a look at their expenses, and a lot of their projects are kind of like break even. They're getting this support dollars from a various group organization, and then the event that's benefiting, say, the Downtown BIA, it's almost equal. Like, you know, you're not putting any money in the bank account here. So I have 2 thoughts with regards to the vote, which will probably, I will be voting against this because I would like to see a caveat in the motion that we will give a certain amount of dollars with the condition that the United Counties meet those dollars. Also, in picking up on the point from Councillor Hollingsworth, if you're going to belong to an association, and if you're going to make an association work, you've got to invest in it. I think there should be membership costs that's associated. I know when I was charged with the management of the Seaway Valley Tourism Association way back when, that was one of the first things that we did was have to levy a membership fee just to make the organization, the association, work and succeed.
Further comments from anyone who hasn't spoken yet? Is that your hand, Councillor McIntosh?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with this, but I'm just wondering if Councillor Good would be agreeable to I guess a friendly amendment that we provide $25,000 until we hire a arts coordinator.
Microphone, please.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, may I make an amendment to my own motion in light of the commentary that's been discussed here?
Is that allowed, Madam Clerk?
Am I allowed to do that? Should I conclude and then, anyways?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, I think we would have to have an idea of what that amendment is.
Sure.
Perhaps you can change your original motion, you can withdraw it. It kind of depends on what you're looking to do.
Okay. I'll just say what I was going to say and then we can, is that okay? I fully appreciate the commentary from all of my colleagues on council. I think it's evident that we want to support the arts. It's evident that there is an economic benefit to this, there's a cultural benefit, and that it's enriching to the lives of our citizens. We understand that this program has previously been funded through the municipal grants program in the last few years, and that right now they've come to a point where they're not eligible for that funding for the next 2 years. In light of that, I think it's very important that we provide a bridge. And while I can appreciate the commentary from Councillor Sabary in regards to making this funding conditional upon funding from the counties, I hope that this would inspire them to also invest in the arts because they realize that there is an economic and quality of life benefit that this brings to our region as a whole. I also sit on the Agri-Food Network who came here and was supported for a $25,000 contribution. They also are a regional organization, and the surrounding counties do contribute to their funding base. They have a membership fee which is medial. It's not a large membership fee, and perhaps this is something that could be considered and that could be accounted for in there. I believe that the intention is to keep this accessible, and I think that holds a lot of value, but in light of making it financially sustainable, there has to be some concessions. So if I may, in trying to kind of find a happy medium between the 5-year ask and something more reasonable, I had proposed 3 years, but I think what may be more palatable to my colleagues around council would perhaps be a 2-year funding agreement that would allow this organization to bridge the gap between the municipal grants funding program, so that they can continue to provide the programming that they're providing, which, as Mr. Fothrop indicated, our arts coordinator may not be able to do all of what they're doing. Arts Walk is coming up on the 23rd of June, and I'm sure that they've been putting countless hours into this, and this will benefit directly Cornwall. So if I can make an amendment to my own motion, which would be to provide $25,000 of funding for 2 years to bridge the gap between the municipal grants program and allow them to continue running services. So this would fund them for 2023 and 2024. That would be my amendment.
Does the seconder support the amendment?
You were the seconder, Todd.
Todd, you,
Yes, I'm supportive of that.
okay. Okay. So the motion is amended. Councilor Hollingsworth?
Can I just get the motion as amended read, please, so I know what we're voting?
Madam Clerk?
So the motion is to enter an MOU with your Arts Council for a term of 2 years at $25,000 per year.
Councilor Dupel?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I haven't spoken on the motion yet, and I wasn't going to because some of my questions were answered, but I'm reserved to support it because when we talk about bridge funding, then the work that went into the municipal grants, so now are we saying to all of the groups that come before us, you can have funding from us for what the policy says, and then we're going to bridge you for 2 more years after that? I know that there's lots of groups that come before us, and for me, that's a reservation because that's exactly what we're doing. Your Arts Council does great work, and I support that 100%. But what we're doing is we're saying that after we've given you what you qualify in the grants, through the grants committee, then we're going to bridge you for 2 more years after that. And for that reason, I'm going to vote no.
Let you speak to other times, Councilor McIntosh. I think we've been around the table on the debate.
I just wanted to explain why I was going to support.
It's getting late. Okay, I'm going to call the vote on the motion. It's just been read. Everyone's familiar with the motion we're voting on? All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Next is the unfinished business listing, Mr. Mayor, and we're looking for a motion to receive it.
Motion? Councilor Sabri, seconder. Councilor Bennett. Any discussion? All in favor? All in favor, council? We're still having a meeting. Thank you. Carries.
Communication item, amendment to the 2023 Municipal Works Fleet Renewal Program, with a recommendation that council approve the amendment of the 2023 Municipal Works Fleet Renewal Program to purchase 2 articulating tractors with attachments.
Councilor Bennett, are you moving the motion? Seconder? Councilor McDonald, any discussion? All in favor? Carried, thank you.
Now going back to our consent items that were moved for discussion. The first one is the Ontario Artisan Wineries, with a recommendation that council support the Ontario Artisan Wineries with their request to eliminate the LCBO markup and wine levy imposed on the direct delivery of 100% Ontario non-VQA wine to a licensee by way of a resolution.
Motion? Are you moving the recommendation, Councilor Gunjo? I need a motion before we can ask questions. Councilor Bennett, seconder. Councilor Hollingsworth. Questions, Councilor Gunjo?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. It's far clear for me to understand why we are endorsing this, since LCBO profits benefit to the whole provinces, including us. So I'm trying to understand why the Cornwall is going to endorse something that is provincial. I don't. If I can have an answer for that, that would be better to understand.
I can provide some context, Councillor Gunjo. So this organization reached out. They've approached cities, municipalities across the province because they're not part of VQA wines. There's a when you purchase wine at the LCBO or through the LCBO system, some wines are labeled as VQA. And these are specific producers within the province. Not every wine producer in the province belongs to them. Currently, the way the system is set up is they get preferential fees and rates from the LCBO, whereas the other producers do not. So this organization is asking for support from municipalities to encourage the province to eliminate this differential in fees. So they do have resolutions, I believe. I know we don't have it here, but I think Ottawa has supported it, and some many other municipalities supported it. My understanding is that when it does come to a council, they generally do support it. I'm not aware at this time offhand. I'm not.
Page 15 shows which ones.
Page 15. I have the electronic.
Oh, sorry.
Right. So it says here that the Township of South Glengarry, the Township of Edwardsburg Cardinal, the Township of East Hawkesbury, the Township of South Dundas, the City of Ottawa have all supported this resolution or similar resolutions. I don't know if that answered your question in full.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, you answered. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Further comments or questions? Councillor Hollingsworth.
I think, Your Worship, what's noteworthy is historically with resolutions like this, essentially we're operating as a bit of a lobby group on behalf of this organization, that to get the municipalities to weigh in on it. We represent kind of the community of Cornwall, and so historically when we get these types of resolutions that are kind of based on provincial legislation, it's to say, see, the local communities are not in favor of this. So we're kind of acting a little bit like a lobby group in a roundabout way. So that's kind of how we get waded into this kind of stuff.
Further questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? It's carried, thank you.
Request for removal of part lot control, with a recommendation that part lot control be removed from lots 16 and 19 of registered plan 52M61, Belfort Estate Subdivision Phase 2, and B, that part lot control be reinstated on the semi-detached lots in Belfort Estate Subdivision once the subject lots have been created by appropriate procedure.
Motion. Councillor Bennett, seconder. Councillor McIntosh. Questions, discussion? Councillor Gunjo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Through you, just want to mention that, or to highlight that this is a great thing that is happening in our community. That's very important to highlight that for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Carried, thank you.
Tender 23 T20 asphalt resurfacing on various city streets, with the following recommendation: that this tender be awarded to Cornwall Gravel Company Limited from Cornwall at a total bid price of $6,381,325.49.
Motion, Councillor Hollingsworth, seconder. Councillor Bennett, discussion? Councillor Gunjo.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. I'm not opposed to this motion, but I just want to mention that we're going to spend more than $6 million, and it's very important not to vote like this in group, but to have 2 minutes to just or 1 minute just to mention that this morning, or we discussed about this, and it's very important to mention that this has been discussed around the table many times before spending this amount of money. That's why I wanted to highlight this one. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Further questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Carried, thank you.
Our next item is the Joint Enforcement Task Force update with a recommendation that council accept this report.
Motion, Councillor Bennett, Councillor Hebert. Questions, comments, Councillor Hebert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Happy to see an update on this work. I hope we see this on a regular basis, maybe with further details on other specific cases that are being addressed. And I'm glad to see that there's some public engagement happening and some community events being attended, specifically around meetings with the Landlord Association. But I guess I want to take this opportunity to remind everybody, if it hasn't been mentioned yet, but there is the early days of a creation of a Cornwall and Area Tenant Association in the works. And they will be holding, the information will come out in the next couple of weeks, but they will be holding a tenant information night on Thursday, August 3rd in the evening at the Cornwall Public Library, where we were going to invite members of this task force to come and speak to tenants about their rights, about their the rules that they need to follow around how they can contact by law, around how to follow fire code and whatnot. So I guess this is, I know that there's multiple departments part of this task force, but I guess an open question to all of them. Would you be interested in coming and participating and taking 10, 15 minutes and speaking to the tenants of Cornwall around what you've already been doing, but more specifically to that target demographic?
Chief Stevenson.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just in response to Councillor Hebert, absolutely. Any opportunity that we can get in front of a group of people, provide messaging that's straightforward, to the point, and that they're all getting the same messaging is absolutely an opportunity we'll take advantage of. So by all means, we would be happy to take part in that.
Okay, great. We will follow up with an email with more details. We hope to have great attendance. We will be providing food and childcare, hoping to remove barriers for people to attend, and hopefully recruit some tenants for the association at that evening as well. So look forward to an email from the tenant leaders.
Further questions or comments? All in favor? Carried, thank you.
Ontario Works caseloads with a recommendation that council receive this report.
Motion. Councillor Dupel, Councillor Bennett. Comments, questions? Councillor Bennett and Councillor Ngunjo.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you. So when I read through this particular report, and the Ontario Works average monthly caseload are huge numbers, and the increases from year to year to year. But is it safe to assume that that's not reflective of Cornwall's increases? Like, if I'm not mistaken, our increased caseload is bigger than that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So typically we would see either a gradual increase, decline in caseloads, and it's typically manageable from month to month. And the province does provide us with a forecast model that would indicate what typically we could see year over year. In this particular case, we have seen a significant spike in our caseload of close to 700 cases in the last year. And certainly we're already at a higher rate now than we are at the provincial forecast to the end of March of 2025.
Right. So in this report is the request for three, right? Yeah. So understanding that, I'm 100% in support. I can't imagine what it must be like working in that office right now with that increase of workload. I think we owe it to our people to get them some support. Thank you.
Councillor Ngunjo.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. The question that I wanted to ask were just answered by Councillor Todd. So thank you very much for your answer, and I'm good to go.
Okay, thank you. All in favor? Carried, thank you.
Bylaws 2023-54 to 62 inclusive, listed on the agenda, are being presented to council for adoption.
Motion, Counselor Dupel, Counselor Sabre, all in favor? Carried, thank you. Any reports from standing advisory, special, and ad hoc committees of council? Okay, seeing none.
We are looking for a motion to adopt the confirming bylaw, Mr. Mayor.
Motion, Counselor Hollingsworth, Counselor McDonald, all in favor? Carried, thank you. Motion to adjourn. Counselor Ngunjo, Counselor Bennett, all in favor? Thank you, council. Good night, bonsoir.